Okay, I hope everyone's doing good today. Um, yeah, we got some stuff to cover and everything. So yeah, there was a storming of the Brazilian government after Lula was sworn in. So we're gonna be covering some of that, and then uh, the Trudeau uh went to the went to Mexico for a summit, and then we got some other stuff, and then 36 or 37-year-old woman dies in the ER waiting for medical care. So I guess with that we will just jump right into it. So yeah, Brazil, like I said, had a lot of had a lot of riots. That oddly enough mirrors the January 6th insurrection that happened in America a couple of years ago, which yeah, it's just crazy. It's like the same shit, man.
They left a trail of violent crime, motivated by anger and politics. The mob trashed Brazil's heart of government in the name of a president who lost and cried foul. This man, pointing to a picture of Jair Bolsonaro, says, "My hero, his house." Authorities say they found 5 unexploded grenades and traces of blood, urine, and feces in presidential rooms.
Like, yeah, it's the same shit that happened in America. Like, as far as like what I know for like what happened and like the reasonings behind it, apparently it's like the exact same that the hogs in America were using for when they stormed the Capitol.
Rioters wielded knives and axes. More than 1,000 have been arrested or detained. Sworn in just a week ago, Brazil's president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, called the riots an attempted coup. Meeting his cabinet inside
I mean, he's right though. It literally is.
the defaced building, he vowed harsh punishment. But the swarming of the capital shows the new government's failed intelligence. The demonstration was not a surprise, widely advertised and aided by some police.
What happened was that
Wait, no, really? It was aided by police? Who could have thought that? You know, police did the exact same thing in the January 6th insurrection, as well as the fucking convoy that happened here. Like, it's not surprising that the fucking cops would do that shit. Like, it just goes to show how fucking disgusting the little pigs are.
not only they went there, but they went escorted by the police. You have images of the police coming with them.
Security forces took 2.5 hours to control the scene. The governor of Brasilia, a Bolsonaro supporter, has been suspended. And encampments of followers outside army headquarters were broken up. In Florida, where Bolsonaro's been staying for
Yeah, I forgot about that. Bolsonaro is in Florida, so there's also that as well.
a week, little sign of him Monday. His family says he went to hospital with abdominal pain. But he denies he incited any of this.
And like the thing with Bolsonaro is he's been staying at like some sort of I think like UFC fighter's house who's like Brazilian and like loves the shit out of Bolsonaro.
And the destruction dug so deep that many, even Lula's opponents, acknowledge it went too far.
Bolsonaro has now become a liability. But
We'll probably blame it on like the equivalents of Antifa or whatever the fuck in that's in Brazil, right? I'm just not sure what the equivalents would be.
But today, at least, the country is united against what happened yesterday.
But echoing January 6th in America, that outrage may not last.
So, Susan, you covered the Brazilian elections in October. This violence for the moment is over, but no doubt that tension is still like simmering below the surface.
Well, yes. I mean, you saw the moral indignation of those rioters, you know, the impunity of what they did. And, you know, Bolsonaro deeply polarized Brazilians, and he left this big rift, which we saw in that election. It was tight, it was fierce, and there's repercussions. And, you know, President Lula faces a divided Congress still because although he won, a lot of Bolsonaro's deputies are in that Congress. So it's week one of President Lula's term, and he's also facing a major crisis still. This isn't going to be swept away.
It's also very familiar. Susan, thank you.
You're welcome.
This? Probably have to watch that sometime.
Thousands loyal to the defeated president, Jair Bolsonaro, swarmed Congress, roamed the presidential palace, and broke into the Supreme Court, shouting
Oh, wait.
freedom,
never mind.
waving flags, demanding a military takeover.
Bro, it literally sounds the exact same as the fucking January 6th insurrection. Like, come on, bro. Come on. The Brazilian hogs are no different from the American hogs, or our hogs. They're all the fucking same.
Posing for pictures in the heart of Brazil's government, the Three Powers Plaza, and seemingly met little resistance. Overwhelming security, even some military police cooperation, according to local news reporting.
Who would have
It
thought?
took hours for security to mount a defense, firing tear gas. On a Sunday, the government buildings were largely deserted. It could have been much worse. At least 170 have now been arrested, and President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, sworn in just a week ago, called the rioters fanatical fascists.
I mean, he's right, though. Like, Bolsonaro is, really fucking fascist, so it's not surprising that he would say this. It's the same thing with the hogs that were in the fucking convoy and in the storming of the Capitol on January 6th. They're fucking fascists and like small business owners and shit.
He criticized police, fired the head of Capitol Security, and vowed the vandals would be found and punished. Blamed Bolsonaro for sowing the seeds of doubt that the fierce...
I mean, Lula is actually fucking doing shit, right? Comparative to, like, when this shit was popping off in America, like, literally nothing happened, right? Like, instead, the exact fucking opposite happened of what should have happened, you know? They were... the police kept their jobs. They were fucking worshipped as heroes for not even trying to, you know, stop the fucking riot. You know, they were given more money. Those the politicians that were actually supporting it, you know, like nothing came out of that. Like nothing bad ever came out of it. In fact, like, just got like at most like a little slap on the wrist, if that.
fiercely contested election in October was valid. His supporters refuse to accept his loss and are inspired by the January 6th type tactics in Washington, says this political scientist.
It's Trumpism all over again. I mean, the pro-Bolsonaro movement in Brazil has emulated, has mimicked pretty much every single step Trump supporters have taken in the United States.
Even like using the exact same fucking arguments for like the election was stolen, right? Like they said it was because of electronic voting, which was so idiotic.
President Biden, traveling to Mexico City, called the attacks outrageous and said the U.S. continues to support Brazil's democracy. Bolsonaro left Brazil for Florida last week, reportedly to avoid criminal investigations. Tonight, he said he repudiates Lula's accusations. But the vandalism and invasion Sunday go beyond acceptable protest. Susan Ormiston.
demanding punishment for those who ransacked and vandalized Capitol. It's totally absurd. It was worse than the moment of history of a 1964 dictatorship. I think everyone was appalled by the images we saw at the National Congress. I think the response is this. It was well done occupying. The fight now is to support the government that we democratically elected, and we are not going to leave the streets. That is the message. It is kind of difficult for us to talk about democracy because democracy for me has the same balance. It always weighs on black people, indigenous peoples, and Quilom Bolus, descendants of escaped slaves. Yeah. Even more so in this act. Waiting for the Brazil's president vowed to find those responsible for organizing the riot. They were shouting for a coup. This was the only thing they could hear. That they were shouting for a coup when the former president of the republic, Bolsonaro, left office without a handover and a vice president. Made the statement on television. They started to attack generals, and the vice president called him a coward, and he betrayed his morning. The morning.
Saber que as pessoas foram retiradas e cada que entrava no ônibus, o ônibus era dirigido para a Polícia Federal e tem quase 1.500 pessoas presas. E vão ficar presas até que a gente termine o inquérito.
There were almost 50,000 people in jail, and they're going to be in jail until we finish the investigation. And it's important that people know that we're non-stop investigation. Those who are possibly victims, and I can't read today.
Nós queremos saber quem pagou para as pessoas ficarem tanto tempo. E vocês sabem que eu sou especialista em acampamento, sou especialista em greve, sou especialista num monte de coisa. Não é possível
A specialist in a lot of other things. Not impossible.
Se não tiver gente o pão de cada dia, o café, o almoço e a janta.
I mean, a lot of people are in support for Bolsonaro, or not Bolsonaro, Lula. They do have some for Bolsonaro as well.
Brazil and the fallout from that attack yesterday on the country's Congress buildings and Supreme Court. Calm has now been restored in the capital, Brasilia, and security forces continue to round up those who are allegedly part of the mob. This is the latest video of some of the 1,500 protesters arrested. They've been taken by buses to a federal holding facility in the capital. The lineup snaking back kilometers at times. Those arrested are supporters of former President Jair Bolsonaro and believe October's election was stolen from him. Here's what the Congress looked like yesterday at the height of the assault. Thousands of people stormed the buildings, smashing their way inside. As you see, many wore yellow and green, colors of the national football team and the country's flag.
Why the fuck did they automatically go to their soccer team? Like, what? Who gives a shit? No, they dressed up in yellow and green because they they stand for freedom in Brazil, brother. These are good patriots right here, you see. Like, why the fuck would you just say that right off the bat? Like, come on, bro.
Bolsonaro's supporters have claimed them as their uniform. Brazil's actual president, the newly sworn-in Lula da Silva, met with his cabinet today at the presidential palace, and the country's ambassador to the United Nations spoke earlier today at UN headquarters.
Government repudiates in the strongest possible terms the violence committed yesterday against executive, the legislative and the judicial branches of government in Brasilia. And we are grateful to the messages of support and solidarity we have received from around the world, including from Secretary General Antonio Guterres. We are confident that the strength of Brazilian institutions will allow us to overcome these violent and lamentable incidents of yesterday and allow us to move forward within the strength of our democratic institutions.
For more on yesterday's assault and its aftermath, let's bring in reporter Sam Cowie. He's in Sao Paulo. So Sam, tell us more about what's been happening in Brazil today in the aftermath.
Yeah, the main thing is, as we said just now, is rounding up these protesters. Well, they're not protesters, vandals who have destroyed government property, and quite stunning scenes of them being all kept together in a federal police gymnasium. So that's been the main events for today, and also just the kind of restoring of calm in the capital, Brasilia. Going forward, you've had the Justice Minister, Flavio Gino, reiterate lots that, the next step is to find who financed this, who banked this act of violence, this attack, right? 80 buses arrived in the capital.
I mean, if we've seen anything from either January 6th or the convoy or like any other like right-wing movements, they're going to have like a figurehead and everything that doesn't know what the fuck they're doing and everything. So either that or it's just like completely like encouraged by like political opponents of whoever is in charge.
Capital Brasilia on Saturday night, Sunday morning. That's gasoline, that's fuel, that's food, that's the bus hired themselves. There are moneyed interests behind this, attempted insurrection. So that's the next step for the Brazilian authorities and the government of Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva here. And they've said that that's going to be their priority going forward, but that they are also quite pleased with the way that calm has been restored. You've had the three branches of government come together and, repudiate this violence. So in the meantime, in the short term, Lula's government has probably got a bit of a boost because there is unity around condemning this violence. In the medium to long term, it will probably create more problems for his governability, which was going to be difficult in the first place because Brazil is so divided right now.
And we see
It also depends on like a lot of other factors on what he does as well. So it doesn't matter if the fucking Bolsonaro supporters care about this shit, right?
see Lula holding a cabinet meeting today to try and show that government is continuing to function. This has the feel, Sam, of the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol in 2021.
Because it's identical.
Stolen. How similar is it to that?
I mean, it's quite similar in many ways, right?
It's identical.
You have,
it's pretty much the exact same fucking thing, right? Like you had, you had them literally shouting the exact same fucking thing as the American hogs.
A series of disinformation networks with disinformation being propelled by the executive, by the former executive, Jair Bolsonaro, as with Donald Trump in the United States, right? So you have a mixture of...
The only difference is that they did it on when Congress wasn't in session, and Bolsonaro fucking fled to Florida like a coward. The different, and like, you know, America did it when they were in session, trying to verify the election results, and Trump was there for the most part. Outside of like, well, he was there for the lead up. He wasn't there for the actual place. Then he just kind of ran off.
The president, the former president in this case, for a long time, Jair Bolsonaro sowed doubt on the electoral system, the same one that got him and his sons elected. So spent most of his presidency sowing doubt on the system, preparing, like laying the ground for an eventual to be able to contest the election, basically.
Where have I heard
you
that
have
before?
similarities there. You have these disinformation networks of fake news on social media. Here it's mostly WhatsApp and Telegram. And then, of course, you have all the usual grifters in the middle that are profiting from this, right? You know, people that are profiting from the chaos, people that are profiting from who would stand to profit more if Jair Bolsonaro was still in the presidency, people that want to intimidate the incoming government, you know, criminal groups that are deeply woven into these protest movements that have their own agenda. And so I think, you know, in many ways, you have like a lot of similarities with what happened in Washington at the beginning of 2021.
Now, we learned today that Jair Bolsonaro was not in Brazil during this unrest. He's in the U.S. In hospital. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, he's in the U.S. He went to the U.S. Some people say that he fled to the U.S.
I mean, of course he fled.
He would recede power, basically, before Lula was inaugurated. So Bolsonaro left on the 28th of December, I think it was. It was, you know, Lula was inaugurated on the 1st of January. It's understood, it's assumed by several sources, according to Reuters, that Bolsonaro entered the United States on a head of state visa. You've got a lot of pressure being put on President Joe Biden right now to revoke Bolsonaro's visa, which is, you know, his responsibility and that any sovereign state can do at any time without any kind of legal justification. So there's a lot of pressure right now being put on Joe Biden to revoke Bolsonaro's visa. And yeah, he's in hospital. You know, he goes to the hospital quite a lot, right, with abdominal pains. Last time it was because he ate a shrimp. He swallowed the shrimp the wrong way or something like this. We saw him in KFC in Orlando just now. Maybe he swallowed a chicken bone wrong or something like that. A lot of these abdominal pains actually come down to the fact that when he was on the campaign trail in 2018, he was stabbed by a mentally ill man. It was like an assassination attempt. At the time, all of his political rivals, all of Bolsonaro's political rivals, wished him well and wished him the best and wished that he would get well soon. But Bolsonaro has always taken this as a kind of that it was a political assassination attempt organized by the opposition and by the left in Brazil. And that's also, you know, a type of fake news that really continues to resonate with his supporters today, until today, as with the fact that the election was stolen. And so, you know, while we've seen all of these arrests and like that's, you know, positive news from Brazil and for the new government to show that it won't tolerate this kind of behavior, going forward, as I've said, it's going to be very difficult, perhaps even more difficult now for Lula to govern going forward. And that really, going forward, we're also going to find out more informations of complicity most likely by the Brazilian state, right? The security forces, the police in the capital, Brasilia. And so all of these cracks that start to appear will undoubtedly make things even more difficult for Lula to govern going forward.
Sam, thank you. Reporter Sam Cowie in South.
I mean, I think he's just going to like completely overhaul it at some point, right? It seems like it. But the thing is that Lula is like kind of predictable, which is why I don't think the U.S. will do like a coup.
Sao Paulo. Canada, Mexico, and the United States condemned the attack ahead of their leaders' summit this week. Prime Minister Trudeau and Presidents Biden and Lopez Obrador issued a statement. In it, they say they will, quote, stand with Brazil as it safeguards its democratic institutions. The statement goes on to say our governments support the free will of the people of Brazil. Trudeau, Biden, and Lopez Obrador are also promising to work with the incoming Lula administration in its attempt to secure a peaceful transfer of power.
Yeah, look at how well they have already succeeded on that front.
A near carbon copy of the attack on the U.S. Capitol, the storming of Brazil's
Yo,
Congress
they showed it side by side. It's pretty much the exact fucking same, man. That's awesome.
followed the same playbook, with a mob fueled by social media lies about a stolen election, carrying banners, telegraphing conspiracy theories about voting machines.
It was very clear that the germ of the idea had been planted in January 6th and was brought back to Brazil.
Yo, look at how many fucking hogs dislike that. That's fucking awesome, bro.
We're all there. Ousted Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro has long been described as the Donald Trump of the tropics. The two ex-leaders are friends. Bolsonaro has been taking advice directly from former Trump strategists like Jason Miller and has the backing of longtime Trump advisor Steve Bannon, a central figure in the global far-right movement and the attack on the U.S. Capitol.
All hell.
The one thing that the media won't mention is the fact that they're not like responsible for like some of the misinformation and everything, because they 100% do spread some of that propaganda for sure.
Hell is going to break loose tomorrow.
Bannon has been cheering on the rioters in Brazil as freedom fighters, using his podcast to push lies about election fraud in Brazil.
Very stark warning to MAGA and to all the Republicans of the games that are being played in these elections.
You have large numbers of pro-Bolsonaro supporters who have been fed a steady diet of conspiracy and misinformation and disinformation.
As Bolsonaro takes refuge in Florida, there are questions about whether the violence may not only have been inspired, but planned in the U.S.
This will be a question for the Brazilian investigation.
2 years after the attack on the U.S. Capitol, election denialism and political violence may stand as a new and dangerous American export. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
I mean, yeah, there is also the aspect of, you know, the America's biggest export is brain rot, which is why we have so much of it here. Brazilian police surrounded and dismantled a camp set up by the Bolsonaro supporters. Thursday, on Sunday, thousands of pro-Bolsonaro supporters stormed the Congress, the Supreme Court, and the presidential palace. I hope that from this decree we can not only take care of the security of the federal district, but guarantee once and for all that it was not to happen again in Brazil. It is necessary that these people are to be punished, which, you know, yeah, they 100% should be punished. On their back or with the nationalist. We have approximately 200 people arrested in the continue because technically the flagrant occurs whilst the crime is being committed shortly after. We are taking the necessary measures, we're taking more measures tonight to reinforce security in the Republic's capital through articulation with ministers. Some governors are giving up military police, that we are mobilizing to strengthen and the protection of the federal government starting tomorrow and in the coming days. Video showed windows being smashed and debris scattered on the ground of the presidential palace. You do not understand. We're human. It's like me. Getting angry for us. I love it when fucking right-wingers shout this shit, because the thing is that they're just mad because their fucking guy lost, generally speaking. And it's so fucking funny. Please stop being little dolls doing this and that. Do what's right. Be good. Do good. Please stop being puppets, please. I fucking love right-wingers, man. They're so fucking funny. Brazil's Justice Minister, Flavio Dino told reporters Monday that about 1,500 people had been detained for questioning in Brasilia since supporters of the far-right former president Jair Bolsonaro stormed government buildings in the capital Sunday. Brazilian soldiers, backed by the police, dismantled the camp of Bolsonaro supporters in the capital on Monday. They placed arrested people on buses bound to the federal police headquarters. Thousands of Bolsonaro's backers had set off marching from the encampment before rampaging through Congress, the Supreme Court, and the presidential offices, smashing windows, furniture, and artwork. They also stole guns and artifacts. It was the worst attack on the state's institutions since Brazil's return to democracy in the 1980s. President Lula, Bolsonaro's leftist rival, who took office on January 1st after the narrow October election win, promised to bring those responsible for the violence to justice. Lula, who was back at work at the ransacked Planalto Palace Monday, met with his defense minister and commanders of the armed forces to discuss the violence reminiscence of the assault on the U.S. Capitol 2 years ago by backers of former President Donald Trump. Supreme Court Justice Alexander de Moraes ordered the governor of Brasilia removed from office late on Sunday for 90 days over alleged security failings. He also ordered social media platforms Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok block accounts of users spreading anti-democratic propaganda. Facebook parent Meta said Monday it was removing content supporting it or praising the weekend ransacked. Totally. The assault raised questions among Lula's allies, but about how security forces in the capital were so unprepared for easily overwhelmed by rioters who had discussed plans on social media for days about gathering for the weekend demonstrations. The occupation for the government buildings had been planned for at least 2 weeks by Bolsonaro's supporters in groups on social media messaging platforms such as Telegram and Twitter. Yet there was no move by security forces to prevent the attack, called by one group the seizure of power by the people. Yeah, totally. messages seen by Reuters, Reuters throughout the week showed members such as groups organizing meeting points in several cities around the country, from the chartered buses leave for Brasilia, which with the intention of occupying public buildings. The plan included camping in front of Brasilia's army command headquarters, where demonstrators have been since October. Lula, the former union organizer who's also president from 2003 to 2010, said the local militarized police force that reports of Brasilia Governor Ibanez Rocha, the former Bolsonaro ally, did nothing to stop the protesters advancing. That's unsurprising. Justice Minister Flavio Dino said investigations would aim to uncover who financed the several hundred buses that brought Bolsonaro's supporters to Brasilia, and also probed Rocha from the not preparing security. I mean, I think we already know who already did it, right? Lula blamed Bolsonaro for inflaming his supporters with a campaign of baseless allegations about election fraud after the end of his rule, which marked by division nationalist populism. Meanwhile, Bolsonaro was admitted to the hospital in Orlando, Florida on Monday with intestinal pain related to a stabbing he suffered during the 2018 election campaign. His wife said on Instagram his doctor said he had intestinal blockage that was not serious and would likely not need surgery. Bolsonaro's future in the United States was also questioned. He traveled there on a visa issued to heads of state, diplomats, and other government officials about 48 hours before his presidential term ended. The U.S. government declined to comment on Bolsonaro's visa, specifically U.S. State Department spokesperson Ned Price, and said a person who entered on a visa where foreign officials must depart the country within 30 days or apply for a change of immigration status if they are no longer engaged in official business. Following the assault on Brasilia, Bolsonaro said on Twitter that peaceful demonstrations were democratic, but the invasion of the government buildings crossed the line. Yeah, okay. Yeah, if you say so. We heard the exact same thing from fucking hogs in America, bro. President Joe Biden is now facing mounting pressure to expel Bolsonaro, including from Democratic lawmakers. The White House said on Monday it had yet to receive any requests from the Brazilian government regarding Bolsonaro's status. By letting him stay, Biden invites criticism that the U.S. harboring a man accused by successor of fomenting an anti-democratic violence. but forcing out the former president of an allied state who entered the country in good faith. The top tier visa poses awkward questions about due process. The attacks on Sunday were condemned by several world leaders and governments at the North American Leaders Summit in Mexico. A joint statement was released on Monday from Biden, Trudeau, and Lopez. Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. condemned the January 8th attacks on Brazil's democracy and on a peaceful transfer of power, the three leaders said. We stand with Brazil as it safeguards its democratic institutions. Our governments support the free will of the people of Brazil. We look forward to working with President Lula on delivering for other countries in the Western Hemisphere. So yeah, Bolsonaro's in Florida. What does the U.S. do now? Far-right former President Bolsonaro flew to Florida 2 days before his term ended, having changed the results having challenged the results of October 30th runoff election. He narrowly lost to a leftist rival Lula. On Sunday, a violent movement of election-denying Bolsonaro supporters stormed Brazil's presidential palace, Congress, and Supreme Court. Come on, bro. Bolsonaro arrived in Florida on December 23rd, or December 30th, sorry. They're missing the inauguration and of a successor. The Washington Post reported stayed in a house in Orlando owned by Brazilian mixed martial artist Jose Aldo da Civel not appear to have engaged in any overtly political activities or appealed at any policy forms since arriving. I mean, we already know that this guy is a gigantic fucking Bolsonaro supporter, right? Bolsonaro is on friendly terms with former U.S. President Donald Trump, and his son, Eduardo Bolsonaro, has belonged to an anti-globalist group formed by Steve Bannon, the former Trump advisor, who faces legal jeopardy on 2 separate cases. Some Democrats believe Bolsonaro should be removed from the country, including progressive New York Democrat Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who tweeted Sunday the U.S. must cease granting refuge to Bolsonaro in Florida. The other end of the spectrum, the far-right House Republican Paul Gosar of Arizona, said he favors granting asylum to Bolsonaro. Yeah, that's not surprising. The White House said on Monday it did not receive any requests from government regarding Bolsonaro's status. But letting him stay in the U.S. The U.S. could face criticism by harboring a man accused by his successor for fomenting anti-democratic violence, but forcing out the former president of an ally state who entered the country in good faith with a top-tier visa poses awkward questions about due process. Bolsonaro, 67, had a factitious relationship with President Joe Biden and was already on weaker ground back home in Brazil after losing broad protections from persecution when he stepped down as president. Those probes could lead to his arrest or prevent him from running for office. Here's how the situation could theoretically play out. Three U.S. sources told reachers that Bolsonaro had almost certainly entered on an A1 visa, which is reserved for heads of state, diplomats, and other government officials. Normally, the A1 is canceled after the recipient leaves office, but with Bolsonaro having left Brazil before his term ended, they suspected his A1 was still active. One of the officials who has experienced with the cancellation of visas of former heads of state said there is no set time or set limit on how long someone can stay in the United States on an A1. We're in uncharted territory, the official said. In response to Reuter's question, State Department spokesperson Ned Price said anyone in the U.S. on A1 visa no longer engaged in official business must depart the country within 30 days or apply for change of immigration status. Price said he could not comment on an individual's visa status, but was speaking in general terms about visa rules. If any individual has no basis on which to be states, individual is subject to removal by the Department of Homeland Security, Price said. Oh, man. That view was echoed by John Feely, a U.S. ambassador to Panama from late 2015 to 2018, said the Central American nation sought the extradition of its former president, Ricardo Martellini. The U.S. or any sovereign nation, for that matter, may remove a foreigner if one has entered illegally on a visa for any reason, Feely said. It's a purely sovereign decision for which no legal jurisdiction is required. Lula has, as he is formally known, has blamed Bolsonaro for Sunday's violence. In a tweet on Sunday, Bolsonaro distanced himself from Sunday's riot, saying it crossed the line of peaceful protest. The attack itself could result in probe with Brazilian Supreme Court led by Presiding Justice Alexander de Moraes. Moraes were to sign an arrest warrant for Bolsonaro, the U.S. Well, he is in the U.S. Former president be technically required to fly back to Brazil and himself over to police. If refused, Brazil could issue an Interpol red notice brought in the U.S. By the U.S. federal agents. Bolsonaro detained, Brazil would have to seek his extradition, with which could take years to play out. Lula had already pledged in his January 1st inauguration speech that Bolsonaro would be prosecuted if needed with respect to cases. Or criminal probes previously underway included allegations Bolsonaro leaned to the federal police for protect his son, spread known electoral falsehoods, and harbored a troll farm, petting disinformation, which from within his presidential office. While the judiciary is independent, prosecutions of former presidents are not unheard of in Brazil. Lula himself was imprisoned due to a corruption case stemming from the sprawling Lava Jato probe, which also saw former President Mitchell Timmer arrested at one point. Lula has maintained his conviction was his conviction was politically motivated. As well, ex-president Fernando Collor de Mello faced a corruption trial in 1990s and was ultimately acquitted. The Bolsonaro question US may be ultimately moot owing to his ongoing health issues. Hospitalized in Florida on Monday, abdominal pains related to his stabbing in 2018 he suffered while on the campaign trail. His wife said on social media. Bolsonaro told CNN Brazil that he intended to cut short his U.S. stay due to medical issues, according to the report published to the outlet's website, adding that the trip was originally planned through to the month's end. So, yeah, we'll move on to this. The Bolsonista terrorist broke down the police barrier and it invaded Congress, ramped threatened to occupy the chamber and Senate. The Minister of Justice announced that he is allowing the use of all federal forces against them. So yeah, it's wild, right? The terrorists invaded the Congress building after they tried to by force entry into the parliament into the chamber. Like, yeah, like, look at this shit, man. Right? The Bolsonaro terrorists are invading the governmental building with windows broken. Bolsonaristas were carrying guns and were trying to invade the federal Supreme Court. They are shooting at the security guards there. Over the past couple months, we saw several episodes of police forces showing lenience towards Bolsonaristas. Now we have footage of them escorting them to the government buildings. They were inside, destroying everything, as we've seen time and time again. Whilst they were invading, the higher powers of Brazil, police officers were taking pictures with some of them, which we saw happening with during the U.S. Insurrection, right? You know, they were being assaulted and robbed as well, like those doing media reports. They're trying to block the palace, you know, attempting to barricade themselves in the building. They were in the the Senate, or the House of Senate.
Espia aí, ó. Espia aí onde é que nós tá. Espia aí.
They destroyed everything and stole computers and other equipment. More images of police officers caught watching the invasion of the Congress without showing any resistance, which is unsurprising. There are pro-coup insurrection movements happening in Rio and São Paulo too. So yeah, it's more images of police calmly talking to the protest. Bro, come on, bro. They're all the same. They are literally all the same. They all look the same. They all talk the same. They all fucking Why the fuck are all right wingers the same, man? Come on, bro.
Eu fui e acompanhei ele até a porta. Ele falou: deixa eu só me identificar e mostrar que a gente tá com vocês. A gente tá do lado do povo. Acabou. Policial federal, hiper, mega, ultra educado. É mole? Será que estamos certos? Brasil!
Bro, come on. President Lula will take a statement on the situation, which he already has. In his speech, Lula said that those responsible for the terrorist acts will be punished to the fullest extent of the law, and that he will sign a federal security investigation decree for the Federal District of Brasilia. He criticized the military police in the Federal District. You know, headlines, newspaper headlines: Brasilia police officers abandoned the protection barrier to purchase coconut water whilst protesters were invading the Federal Supreme Court. Which, you know, isn't surprising. Like, police overall just fucking suck and will do this shit regardless. And they were being taken away. So, it's cool. Guess this was all part of the same thread.
We begin, though.
So let's talk about the
Mary Scott Greenwood.
let's talk about the the shit that went down with Canada, Mexico, and the US.
Which is the CEO of the Canadian American Business Council. Thank you so much for taking time for us today. So, as I was saying, a lot actually that came out of this morning meeting. Scotty, can you start by just telling us what struck you as the most significant?
Well, the most significant, I think, is a feeling finally in Canada, the United States, and Mexico that we need to operate as a unit, that the North American neighborhood is meaningful, and we're going to join arms and confront some of the world's problems together, especially economically. And I know that sounds, kind of non-specific, but it's really important when you think about, are we going to compete against each other? Are we going to work together? And so that's the biggest sort of overarching theme that I see coming out of this summit.
Give me an example of where you see that.
Perfect example is the new trade agreement that we have, our favorite topic, the USMCA, as we call it here. There's a dispute resolution process in that, right? And there's currently a dispute in the automotive sector. And Canada and Mexico have gotten together and said to the US, we disagree with the way you are calculating North American content. It's awfully specific, but so that has gone to a dispute resolution process. We think it's going to come out in the next few weeks, and it's going to rule against the US in favor of Canada and Mexico. And so coming out of this summit, the US has a choice to make. Does it abide by the ruling of the panel, if that's how it rules, against the US and say, okay, well, we'll change how we do it and we'll comply with USMCA? Or does the US do what it has done sometimes with WTO rulings, World Trade Organization rules, and say, we don't care? If it says we don't care and it ignores the panel, then this whole North American idea and all of this great rhetoric that's coming out of this summit today will be for naught. So I think the timing is almost perfect because it kind of forces...
Of course America was going to get out a fuck ton of the USMCA.
This is the US
Not surprising.
Live up to the rules-based trading system that it's touting right now. So I think it's good.
Okay, there are a couple of other issues that I really want to talk to you about. And speaking of almost perfect timing, I can't resist because a minute ago we saw Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino on screen. And I know you are quite excited about what we're hearing about the Nexus program and sorting things out there. So can you talk us through that?
Well, I mean, the Nexus is a very important trusted traveler program, as I'm sure your viewers know, between Canada and the United States. Our countries have been at an impasse about how to reopen the Nexus enrollment centers in Canada once the border reopened after COVID. The U.S. centers opened, the Canadian centers didn't, and there's been a disagreement this whole time about that. And as a result, mostly Canadians haven't been able to get their Nexus cards renewed, and they've had all kinds of disruptions at the airport, and this made even worse. So today we see a breakthrough, and in the government's agreeing to reopen those centers, and they're doing it differently. There's kind of a new model. It's a model that we actually floated several months ago as a possibility, and it looks like we still need to get more details, but it looks like they're going to adopt something that we've been advocating for quite some time. So yes, we're happy. We think it's important.
Right on. And I want to ask you too, the Biden visit, right? It is something that sort of dominates the question about the Canada-U.S. relationship. He has said he's coming in March. So I guess we can already start parsing the significance of what that visit is going to look like. What will you be watching for? Because we know it's much anticipated. So what do you want to see about decisions he makes about what he does while he's here in Canada?
Well, it is a big deal. Anytime you can have the attention of a world leader focused just on you, that's a good thing. So we know that economic competitiveness and collaboration is important. We know carbon transition is important. I think critical minerals will be top of mind for the President of the United States when he goes to Canada. And Canada has an important story to tell there. So I think that's what it's about. The other issues are not bilateral. They are what's happening in the world and how can we work together to deal with those issues. So, there's no doubt the President of the United States will bring his wish list when he comes to Canada, just as all leaders do when they travel.
Okay, I want to bring another guest into our conversation, Scotty Arturo Sarukian. He's the former Mexican ambassador to the United States.
He's the best.
And he's joining you on the program right now. Welcome very much. To start with, I just wonder what you are looking to hear out of this joint news conference from the three leaders.
Well, I think that most North American Leaders Summit have tended to underwhelm and underdeliver. My concern a bit is that this one might do the same at a moment where geopolitical stakes are very high. They're very high for the United States and what is probably the most important recalibration of U.S. foreign policy since the end of the Cold War, which is the United States' relationship with China, and how Mexico and Canada need to play a key role. They're sort of like a keystone, particularly when it comes to trade and economic issues, whether it's supply chains, whether it's critical minerals, whether it's how do we use a common paradigm for North American energy efficiency, energy security, energy independence. And so what I would hope comes out of this meeting that ends today in Mexico City is a clear roadmap, a clear vision of how these three countries are profoundly interconnected, and hopefully that the diplomatic bandwidth coming from Washington in its engagement with Canada and its engagement with Mexico can be up to par to the needs that the three of us will be facing in the coming decades.
I'm curious to what extent you think you have seen that reflected thus far. And I will just pause for a moment here. This is perhaps a bit of a facile example, but here in Canada, this meeting is front page news. It's leading a lot of our newscasts. You look at the coverage in the United States on any major website today, and I can't find a mention of it on the main page. Does that say something about the extent to which at least the United States, but perhaps all the parties are engaged in the way that you're looking for?
Absolutely. I think the coverage in Canada is very similar to the coverage in Mexico. It's all over the news in Mexico. Here in Washington, much less. I think it's only those who follow these issues very closely that are sort of tweeting and writing and putting blogs. But there is a sense in Washington, I think.
I mean, this isn't making front page news in the U.S. because they're too busy trying to find a fucking Speaker of the House. Like, they've tried, 7 times or something like that.
For those of us who've invested a lot of years in the North American relationship and the potential of the North American relationship, that the United States does tend to take both Canada and Mexico for granted. My hopes are that because of what's at stake in how the United States needs to rethink its economic and trade paradigm, whether it's nearshoring or reshoring, supply chains, essential minerals, how we ensure that the North American automotive juggernaut transitions successfully from what it is today to electronic vehicles, how both Canada and Mexico can piggyback on the chips, on the infrastructure, even sort of on a fuzzier feature.
I mean, we just need to move past that.
I was listening in on the whole issue of trusted traveler.
We need to invest in public transit.
Canada and the United States will be co-hosts to the 2026 World Cup. Mexico has a global entry program with the U.S. Canada has its program with the United States, but the three systems don't talk to one another. We should, and this isn't, in my view, this is really small potatoes. It would be very important for the three countries to harmonize these three systems of trusted traveler programs, so that Canadians, Mexicans, and Americans, when they're traveling to the different games in the World Cup in Canada, Mexico, and the United States, can use this system. And so, I would hope that there's, besides some of these concrete issues that I think are important, the energy dispute, the ongoing energy dispute between Mexico, Canada, and the United States, which will play a very important role because, yes, we're all talking about nearshoring, but if you don't have an aligned energy paradigm, that nearshoring is not going to happen.
Well, our finance minister prefers friendshoring too, so there's another
I like ally shoring, but
There we go. There we go. Scotty, I want to bring you in on this conversation because I'm reflecting a bit as we're talking about it. And, you know, what Arturo Sarukian is saying, I think anybody listening at home would go, of course, we should all work together. Of course, there should be more harmony. Gosh, that's in the best interest of the world. When these leaders or three leaders in these positions get into the room, how much more difficult do you think that is when the rubber meets the road to actually try to get the three countries on the same page?
Very hard.
Well, when the three leaders are in the room together, Catherine, I think that's when it's the easiest because it's an individual, person to person, friend to friend, colleague to colleague conversation, and each one
They
is
also have to deal with the press
about what he
too, though.
wants out of it. And it's different what each wants out of it. I think where it gets difficult
There's
is
that
domestic
aspect of it too.
politics in all three countries, which are quite different for each of the leaders. And our systems are different. Our constitutional democracies and parliamentary systems are really different. And so that's the hard part. And that's why, we see that all three countries sent business delegations. All three countries will go back to their home capitals and talk a lot about the North American idea, which is something the ambassador and I were together in Mexico City several months ago talking about at a conference called the North Capital Forum. So you got to go back home and talk to civil society and business and labor and everybody else. That's where the hard work is. It's not at the leader meetings. Once the leaders get in the room together, they do pretty well.
Arturo, I wonder if you could just give us sort of like a bit of a snapshot when Scotty talks about the domestic politics. I mean, I think we've gotten a bit of a sense of it over the course of this meeting about what Andres Manuel López Obrador is dealing with at home when it comes to some of the protectionist policies around the energy sector. But what should the big takeaway be for Canadians about what is front and center in his domestic agenda as he tries to engage with Canada and the U.S.?
Well, and I can't avoid. Scotty was talking about the personal dynamics once the three leaders are in the room. Believe me, as an ambassador who's been in several of these summits with obviously not these leaders, but with others, sometimes those personal dynamics have not been peachy and fuzzy. Believe me. I remember some very complex moments between Prime Minister Harper and President Barack Obama here in Washington. But I think that there's one salient.
I mean,
issue,
they were
which is probably
fairly
on the mind
similar, all things
of Prime
considered,
Minister
though.
Trudeau and President López Obrador, which is what's going to happen in the U.S. in 2024? What's going to happen on the road to 2024? Mexico and the United States will have presidential elections the same year. Mexico in the summer, the United States in the fall. With immigration policy in the United States becoming a third rail of domestic politics. That's what explains why President Biden stopped in El Paso for his first trip to the border.
I mean, it doesn't matter,
2 years
right?
ago, with immigration playing out the way it's playing out, with the Republican Party using
it doesn't matter though, because they're always going to be incredibly fucking terrible when it comes to immigration, especially at the southern border.
That's going to be a complex issue,
right?
And I think both Canada and the United and Mexico may be sort of wondering what's going to happen in the presidential elections in 2024. Is Trump going to come back? Is a mini-me Trump going to come back and sort of resort to that same nationalistic?
Yeah, his name is Ron DeSantis.
So part two, there's and this is probably happening not only in Ottawa and Mexico City, it's happening most likely in other diplomatic capitals around the world. A calculus of how much diplomatic bandwidth leaders engage with in their relationship with Biden and the United States, given the very profound polarizing domestic politics that we're seeing in Washington here today. And so that's something that I think is playing a role. The issue of energy, I really sort of, if you were to poll most Mexicans, I think yes. If the question was, should Mexico defend its interests when it comes to energy? I think overwhelmingly people will say yes. But once you start breaking that down and you sort of drive it down to should Mexico pick a fight with Canada and the United States over the energy paradigm that President López Obrador is invested in, that's where you start getting a significant bunch of people saying that they don't agree with that. So domestic politics may play a bit of a different role, particularly on the energy issue. but it is a salient issue for López Obrador's party faithful and rank and file, undoubtedly.
Okay. In closing, we are still waiting for this news conference to start. We've got a live shot up there, and we've seen some of the various cabinet ministers. Certainly, I recognize some Canadian faces there, chit-chatting with some counterparts and officials. But as we wait to actually hear the leaders speak, I was hoping that both of you could kind of give us a closing thought about one thing to listen for, watch for, be it an issue or something about the shape of all of this that gives us a sense of whether or not this was indeed a meeting of substance. Scotty, I'll start with you.
Well, it absolutely was a meeting of substance. You're going to know that from the many issues
Easily.
that are outlined in all of the readouts about what they're doing there. I think there are 6 different issue areas, but for the leaders briefing itself, I think the issue is, do they reference willingness to have North America act as a bloc, or do they end up just speaking to their own domestic hometown crowd? So that's what I'll be looking at. Are they willing to kind of support each other in this North American idea? One other thing, Catherine, just really fast. I didn't mean to say every time any leaders get together, it's warm and fuzzy. I agree with the ambassador. Sometimes it's not. I just meant these particular ones are aligned on so many sort of values issues and they're happy to be meeting with each other. And it's in contrast with the previous president, who was kind of hard to meet with. So that's what I meant.
Yeah, I think we can appreciate the contrast. Arturo, we are going to have you back sometime to tell us those Harper-Obama stories, if that's something you feel like you can do. But today we'll ask you for just a bit of a closing thought of what to look for.
I would agree with Scotty that in my book, the most important thing that I would like to see coming out of this, and what I continually ask for when I talk about North America, is the vision thing. Do the 3 leaders understand the importance of North America working, engaging, collaborating as a bloc, whether it's on energy, whether it's on climate change, whether it's on migration flows, where the 3 countries signed the LA Declaration on Migration during the Summit of the Americas, whether it's on global and regional affairs. I thought it was incredibly important that on the eve of the summit, the 3 leaders put out a statement defending Brazilian democracy and condemning the unfortunate events that were playing out in Brasilia a couple of days ago. I think that was very relevant because that starts conveying a narrative to the rest of the world of what North America is about. So that's something that I'm looking for.
Sure.
Excellent. Arturo Sarucan, former Mexican ambassador in Mexico City. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has touched down there for the North American Leaders Summit. He and his wife Sophie were greeted by President Andrés Manuel López Obrador and Mexico's First Lady. U.S. President Joe Biden arrived earlier. Next hour, the 3 leaders sit down for a private
Late,
dinner.
just
Tomorrow
like
is when the
everything.
formal talks begin on everything from the economy and trade to climate change and drug cartels.
We'll probably talk about that later on the weekend. So
let's talk about what is top of mind, I should say, for the 3 leaders as they meet in Mexico City. Agustin Barrios Gomez is a former federal congressman and diplomat from Mexico, and Bruce Heyman is the former U.S. ambassador to Canada. Welcome to you both. Thank you so much for being on the program.
Thank you.
I want to talk to start a bit about the state of these relationships, and I'll start with you, Bruce Heyman. We know there have been some highs and lows in recent years. What would you describe as, let's call it the vibe, the level of like-mindedness heading into this meeting?
Oh no, they're using Vibe
in the
now.
US-Canada relationship, it's very strong right now. I will tell you, while we have some differences on some trade items, for the most part, I would tell you that it's been about as good as it's been since the Obama administration, clearly. With regard to Mexico, I'm so glad to see this opportunity to sit down and address, maybe in private, which is the right place to do it, address some of the trade issues that we're facing, migration issues, and drug enforcement issues that we're facing more with Mexico. I don't think that applies as much to Canada, but Canada's not immune from these things.
Augustine, I'd like to bring you in there and ask, is Canada, I hesitate to say a bit of a sideshow, but given what Bruce Heyman is just saying, given what I'm seeing, some of the coverage from international agencies barely mentions that Canada is there. How significant a role do you expect our country to have at this discussion?
I honestly don't think there would be too big.
I would start by saying that there are two uninvited countries that are very much surrounding the agenda in this particular North American Leadership Summit, or Three Amigos Summit, as some call it, and those are Russia and China. And I think in that sense, the United States has to look to Canada very much in the geopolitical sense as a part of NATO and all of these different things, where that conversation is very relevant. And when it looks to Mexico, it has to deal with other issues, and particularly this concept of nearshoring and all of these different things. Mexico, at the end of the day, has an economy that's 130 million people. There are 37 million Mexicans and Mexican Americans in the United States. The level of integration between Mexico and Canada is really not seen anywhere else. And so the issues that they have to deal with, that these two countries have to deal with, are huge and loom large. The issues that the U.S. and Mexico have to deal with Canada in terms of strategic interests, in terms of geopolitics, are also very, very large, but they're not as defined as the issues on the southern border.
Bruce Heyman, let's pick up on that idea, particularly of China, because that is certainly coming up in a lot of the agenda setting, a lot of the coverage, the idea that all three countries will be working to lessen their reliance on China. How much progress on something like that actually gets made at a meeting like this?
So everything's incremental in these meetings. When diplomats get together, we move in inches. We don't necessarily move in miles. But the path forward is really important here. And what is incredibly important is that the leaders are all together having this discussion and understand each other on a personal level. Everybody should know that this all existed. This three partnership get-together started with George W. Bush in 2005 in the Security and Prosperity Partnership, and then moved to the North American Leaders Summit, and happened all the way through until the Trump administration, when it didn't happen in 2017, 18, 19, or 20. So it was reignited by President Biden last year, and I'm glad to see it's in Mexico. Look, we have to sit down at the table as world leaders in this region to tackle the things that are important to us. And I think, we would just discuss the world on a geopolitical basis and the challenges from Russia and China. But we have some near-term issues facing us with
Russia, yeah, sure, but like,
as well.
Okay, well, let's talk, Mr. Barrow.
The fuck is China gonna do? Like, honestly,
one of those issues in particular. We know going into this, there's
literally
been
nothing.
A lot of attention about the idea that Canada and the United States might sort of try to push Mexico a bit on energy policy, limiting foreign.
Like, the only thing that China would actually kind of hurt would be supply chains, but like, I don't really think that's going to be too big of an issue unless like a vast majority of
outside countries
of China catches COVID, right?
Right. This is a very difficult issue because President López Obrador is also getting a lot of feedback, a lot of heat from the business community in Mexico, which basically is saying, do what you want, but energy is key for nearshoring. Energy is key for growth, and if you want to have a source of wealth for Mexicans, you really are going to have to let this one go, kind of thing. And you have to understand, López Obrador comes from an energy nationalist position, where they love this idea where everything comes from the state. Everything is very petro-oriented, right? It's very hydrocarbon oriented. That's the way they were brought up. That's kind of their shibboleth, so to speak. And it's been very, very difficult to move them to the center on this. But you'll notice that the White House actually today was very pointed in saying that energy issues have not been resolved in Mexico. And in fact, there are
he's right though.
Efforts to negotiate to make sure that Mexico does actually meet its obligations under the new NAFTA, right? Under the USMCA.
Bruce Heyman, I want to ask you about another energy issue, but one of a bit of a different kind, the Inflation Reduction Act, right? Mega billions invested in the clean tech sector. I've talked to officials here in Canada, some who are wringing their hands about this, some who say, hey, great investment in clean technology. What do you think Canada needs to be doing right now, though, or what conversations might even be happening in these meetings to ensure that the United States doesn't just essentially suck up all the money there is to be invested in clean technology right now?
I mean, America doesn't really do that, though. Like, they don't spend any of their fucking money on green energy.
Auto-related electric vehicles, whether
Like
it's
what?
battery technology, assembly, manufacturing.
There's still a
needs to
very
continue to
heavy
make it
fossil
very
fuel
attractive to do business in
country,
Canada. I think it
and like
serves
to that
North America
extent, so are
well,
we. But still,
for Canada to be part of that manufacturing, as it does for Mexico. And we all need to be on the playing field together. I think the provisions that caused everybody the largest concern were the electric vehicle tax credits, and that was dealt with. In this, in this provision. So I think, like everything else, once the laws have been set, that the countries need to make it incredibly attractive for businesses to do business. And I think that's Canada's opportunity set here.
Bruce Heyman, I can't let the two of you go without asking you about the question that I know diplomats on both sides of our border are frankly maybe getting a little bit tired of. But a lot of folks look at a visit from President Biden as a barometer of the Canada-U.S. relationship. A real life one, not a virtual one, hasn't happened yet. Do you think it is important that that announcement come out of this meeting, that Joe Biden's going to come visit Canada?
Well, I don't know if it comes out of this meeting, and I don't like putting timelines and deadlines on the president of the United States.
But I'm asking how significant you think it is. Yeah, sorry, sir.
Look, it's important, but let's be realistic about this. He was there in the last days of the Obama administration, the state dinner hosted. He hosted the first virtual bilateral meeting when we were in the midst of COVID with the prime minister. And so I don't want to make this bigger than what some people may be making in Canada today. But yes, I would love to see it as a supporter of Joe Biden and a lover of the Canada-U.S. relationship. I'd love to see it happen, and I'd love to see it happen sooner rather than later.
Okay, it's certainly something we're going to watch for. Thank you both so much for your perspective today. Appreciate it.
I think it's a non-issue thing, to be honest with you.
Prime Minister Trudeau is set to fly out of Ottawa shortly to meet up with his North American counterparts. U.S. President Joe Biden's approach to energizing electric vehicles could spark debate at the summit, which will also include talks on American protectionism, continental trade, and illegal migration. Biden is already in Mexico City. It's his first visit to Mexico since becoming president. Trudeau will meet with business leaders ahead of the summit later today. CTV's Judy Trinn's going to be traveling with the Prime Minister, leaving shortly. She joins me now from Ottawa. So, Judy, tell us more about what's on the agenda for the Prime Minister when he arrives in Mexico. Certainly, his goals are going to be different from Joe Biden's.
Very much so, Marcia. And one of the main things that he will have to focus on is making sure that he is loud and clear about what Canada's aims are, despite the very big distractions that Biden is facing. There is global strife, global war, and global disputes that have to be dealt with and will also be discussed. But Canada has an agenda and it wants to be heard. As soon as the Prime Minister gets off the plane, he is going to head to a meeting with North American business leaders. Now, at the same time that he's holding that meeting with the business leaders, Biden will be meeting with Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador. So there's no denying that Canada is taking a backseat to Mexico during this North American Leaders Summit. What
I mean,
Trudeau
honestly,
is going to do is he is
from like everything that I've heard, it seems like we're like the third wheel, to be honest.
as and its ability to power the green energy future. More than 70 nations have signed on, committed to going zero emissions by 2050. So the future is in clean energy, which requires critical minerals, which Canada has reams of. We have lots of resources, but most of it is in the ground, and Canada needs investment to get those minerals processed and into our laptops, our cell phones, and into electric vehicles, Marcia.
Judy, how much concern was there about the leaders going to Mexico at a time when there is violence breaking out over the capture of a drug lord? Was there any concerns about how these leaders will be protected?
Well, one of the things on the agenda between Biden and Obrador is fentanyl and the drug wars. And,
No shot, bro. No shot. Fentanyl, really? Come on, bro. Oh no, all the fucking cops are gonna overdose. Come on, bro. They're not even gonna fucking overdose. They don't even fucking overdose either. They have fucking panic attacks. Oh, come on. Why the fuck did you... Oh, this is so great, man.
Tells, right? So they want
I fucking
to deal
love
with that
conservative
issue. What
media.
we have been told is that there will most likely be increased security. As for media, in terms of where we're able to travel, we don't usually travel with the motorcade, but we will be traveling with the Prime Minister's motorcade because of this extra security. But you know what? Other international issues are also at play here, along with trade issues, which will be discussed. Canada will also be discussing with the U.S. and Mexico issues pertaining to Ukraine. How are we going to continue supporting Ukraine's effort to fend off Russia? How we're also going to have to deal with Haiti. We know that there is increasing gang violence in Haiti, as well as a cholera outbreak, as well as border issues. The issue of illegal migration, illegal border crossings continues at the borders. Biden was just at
I mean, a lot of that does have to come to
so these issues will be discussed,
as well as like America's destabilization of a vast majority of the nations,
and they
right?
are important issues.
Whether directly or indirectly.
Is that global conflict could take precedent over any talk of investment or trade that Canada may want to pursue. And Marcia, I should point out also that I've been told that one of the things that Canadian officials have been hoping for is to secure a visit from U.S. President Biden. So we'll wait to see whether or not that happens, whether or not there is going to be some kind of announcement about that type of visit in the future.
Okay, good.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau waving goodbye to Canada Monday before taking off for Mexico City, where the so-called Three Amigos summit with his North American counterparts gets in full swing Tuesday, with Mexico's President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, also known as AMLO, he's hosting the gathering. The U.S. president touching down south of his border over the weekend. Joe Biden and Trudeau are scheduled to hold a bilateral meeting Tuesday morning.
A big piece of it is how we make sure we're maximizing the economic opportunities.
Speaking ahead of his trip, Trudeau touching on one key item on his agenda, telling Reuters Canada and the U.S. will argue that resolving a dispute over measures that favor Mexican energy companies would help draw more foreign investment to Mexico.
Both,
I mean, yeah, but like also like destabilization of Mexico doesn't really help either.
This needs to be understood as a way to help Mexico,
as well as being like, oh well, as well as like pushing all of like the asylum seekers that America faces to Mexico. That doesn't help either.
For Mexican people.
Ahead of the talks, Biden touring a border wall between the U.S. and Mexico, a stop that sparked criticism because Biden didn't meet or see any migrants during his brief visit. The crisis at the border, a top
I love
issue
this.
during meetings with
I love this because like the thing is that like it's just so stupid, right? Because we already know that, you know, there are gonna be like fucking kids in cages and everything, right? Like Obama built them, Trump filled them, and Biden's maintaining them. That's really all that they're fucking doing. Like America, like when it comes to like American asylum seeking and everything like that, you know, they'll just fucking throw you in concentration camps and shit. Like it's completely disgusting, right?
Biden and AMLO, along with drug trafficking.
And we already know that those conditions are really bad too.
Mexico, the background to the summit, following the arrest of an accused drug lord, the son of former cartel leader El Chapo. Gun battles leaving roughly 30 people dead. The Canadian government issued a shelter-in-place advisory last week for Canadian tourists in Mexico's Sinaloa state. And Ottawa is still recommending avoiding non-essential travel across parts of that region. Melissa Duggan, City News.
Ooh, excuse me.
So, David, trade and the economy obviously high up on the agenda.
Yeah, supply chains right at the top of that list too, Adrian. Deeper ties between the three countries in key areas such as microchips, electric vehicles, and critical minerals, because there's a shared strategic appetite to lessen their reliance on countries like China for those economic necessities. It's a lesson they learned the hard way during the pandemic. It's a lesson that Europe is learning now when it comes to energy after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So the high-level talks here is that this has all forced a global transition in trade. So how does this highly successful trading bloc capitalize on that transition?
And I suppose along with the trilateral meetings, Justin Trudeau will obviously be meeting one-on-one with Joe Biden. What are we expecting them to talk about?
Right, so trade will be at the top of that agenda too, but two things to watch on. And one is the Nexus program. The U.S. has refused to reopen a series of offices in Canada because of concerns over legal protection for the employees that work there. That's led to a real backlog in this program. We're told that there has been significant progress made on this issue and to expect an announcement tomorrow. And also on Haiti. The U.S. is looking for a country to lead the security and humanitarian response in that country. And the White House says this is something that President Joe Biden will raise directly with Prime Minister Trudeau when they meet tomorrow.
All right, David Cochran in Mexico City. Thanks, David.
Oh yeah, I forgot about this. The person, remember when the 8 teenage girls attacked and killed someone? We have a little bit of information on who that was. Police have identified the 59-year-old homeless man who was killed in downtown Toronto during alleged swarming attacks, which were for 18 or for 8 teenage girls stand accused of murder. On Tuesday, authorities released Ken Lee's name to the public 3 weeks after they had announced his death on December 18th. A photograph of him was also of him as a younger man was also revealed. Investigators told police. Investigators at the police service said they had been keeping Mr. Lee's name under wraps until the kin were notified. Now, these relatives are reeling. They are still very hurt with the event. Homicide detective Terry Brown said in an email. On Tuesday, Mr. Lee was remembered at Toronto's homeless memorial during a noontime gathering. He was named at the makeshift monument as being among at least 15 people who have died on Toronto streets this winter. That seems way too high, if you ask me. 15 people seems way too high for just this winter alone. People who spoke at the memorial, which is located outside of the Church of the Holy Trinity near the Eaton Center, said the other cases involved death from overdose, fire, suicide, or freezing in the cold. But they characterized Mr. Lee's death as a powerful reminder of the violence suffered by people living on the margins. I'm not going to talk about Ken for the sake of his family, said Diana Chun McNally, a crisis worker. There is such an increase in violence against people who are on the streets, she said after the memorial. This is a most extreme example of that. 1 week before Christmas, Mr. Lee was outside in a shelter near Union Station, which he got into a confrontation around midnight. 8 girls between the ages of 13 and 16 were charged in his death. Detectives have said that the girls came from all over the Toronto area and that they have met through social media before heading downtown at night. It's our belief right now that the now deceased was in possession of liquor, a liquor bottle. Detective Sergeant Brown said when he announced the charges last month. And we think that's why they were trying to take what they were trying to take, but we can't say with certainty. I mean, 100% that's the case, right? The 18s facing second-degree murder charges are in the early stages of their appearances before the courts. Their identities are being withheld under Canada's Youth Criminal Justice Act. In late December, one accused girl was released on bail. Hearings for the other 7 are to occur later this winter. A publication ban has also been placed on any discussion of evidence present in the court. Other strictures opposed by the courts are blocking the release of information about the case to journalists. On Friday, lawyers representing the Globe and Mail and other news outlets will appear in court to press for a greater degree of access. Last month, a resident of a downtown shelter told the Globe she knew Mr. Lee as Kenny, Kenny. Kate Chipita said she was watching him start to lose his life as he was taken away by paramedics in the aftermath of the attack. She described him as a father and said he may have family overseas. I mean, there definitely is like a there definitely is a form of Asian hate for sure, because like ever since COVID, Asian hate has been going up, which is completely ridiculous. Like hate crimes towards like, you know, the Asian community that have literally nothing to do with COVID is just ridiculous, right? Like any form of hate crime is psychotic, though. The attack occurred outside of Strathcona Hotel on York Street. It is one of the several downtown hotels the city of Toronto has been leasing to operate as homeless shelter recent years. Mr. Lee once lived in that shelter, according to police, who have also said he was not a resident at the time of his death. Court records filed in Old City Hall show that a man named Kenneth Lee gave an undertaking in court this fall concerning the Strathcona. In September, he told a justice of the peace he was staying 10 meters away from the hotel at all times after an unproven allegation that he has had an altercation with someone else who lived there. Mr. Kenneth Lee in question had no fixed address. He was 59 and his 60th birthday would have occurred last week, which is really sad. Like, at least we now like kind of at least we know who was the victim of this now, right? But it's still completely disgusting that this shit happened, right?
Cryptocurrencies are digital currencies, and they're popular among
So yeah,
investors.
even mainstream media like Global News are starting to call cryptocurrencies scams, which I find completely ironic. Like, it's just so funny.
Making them also
Or they're talking about crypto scams, despite the fact that cryptocurrency literally is a fucking scam, right? It's essentially just fucking modern day Beanie Babies.
Popular with scammers.
Our enforcement division has seen a dramatic increase.
And we've seen the whole fucking scam shit with Bankman fraud, right?
In the reporting of crypto-related scams since the fall.
In the past 2 years, it's been estimated North Americans have lost over $1 billion to crypto scammers. In Nova Scotia, since September.
I mean, like, I'm sorry, but if you invest into crypto, you deserve everything that you lose. Or you lose everything. If you make any losses, that's completely on you for buying into that shit. It's the same shit with like NFTs, right?
At least 24 people have lost nearly $750,000.
There is also that aspect of, you know, like older people being tricked into it, like, you know, they're gonna make money off of it and everything. Like, yeah, I feel for them, right? But generally speaking, it tends to be like a bunch of like small business owners or fucking idiots who think that they're gonna be rich and whatever because they're investing in crypto.
Scam artists continue to use that hook about how you can use crypto potentially to make lots of money really quickly.
I mean, that's the crypto business in general.
Scammers will make contact with individuals through social media or by text message, and they'll then work to build up a relationship. And once that relationship has been established, they'll talk about how they've made lots of money with crypto investments, and they'll encourage their target to make investments as well.
Once an individual sends money, the scammer will then produce fake documents showing that the investment has grown significantly and encourage the target to invest even more.
I mean, this is they're literally just explaining the fucking crypto market in general. That's all that it is.
When an individual requests to withdraw funds, the scammer will charge them taxes and fees. Once those have been collected, they'll disappear, taking with them the target's money.
We've seen a lot of people, unfortunately, take out lines of credit or use their credit card to invest heavily in these scams.
As digital scams grow, police have dedicated units to investigating these scams, but it can be very difficult to lay charges.
They have to be in Canada or a country where we have a bilateral relationship with. If they're in a country where we don't have a bilateral relationship with, then usually our investigation stops at that country.
To protect yourself, be wary of anyone you don't know contacting you online. And if anyone you've never met tries to encourage you to invest,
I would suggest that.
I mean, even if it was someone that I knew personally, I still would not invest in fucking crypto because I'm not a fucking moron, right? Crypto is a complete fucking scam. And anyone who thinks that it's not is a fucking idiot. Because the only people that, you know, actually make something out of it are either early adopters or those who actually start their own fucking crypto shit and scam people out of their money to begin with, like Bankman fraud, Logan Paul and his fucking crypto zoo bullshit, like, which was really funny because he got fucking scammed out of it. Like, it's ridiculous.
You back away quickly.
And for those who are interested in investing in crypto, make sure that the trading platform being used is registered with the government. Alicia Drous, Global News, Halifax.
Should just completely fucking ban. We should just completely fucking ban crypto in general. Okay, so nurses in New York have been going on strike. We might dive into this a little bit deeper in the future. More than 70,000 nurses went on strike at 2 New York hospitals on Monday after contract negotiations stalled over pay and staffing levels. Since beginning the contract, the negotiations for 4 months, the union had been able to reach agreements or new contracts for nurses at 7 other New York hospitals.
Nurses don't want to strike. We would rather be inside.
taking care of our patients, but safely.
I mean, we see the exact same shit happening here, right? And then we have idiots like fucking Doug Ford or Scott Moe or whoever the fuck being like, oh, what's that? You guys want better fucking wages, benefits, making equipment and all that? Well, go fuck yourselves. If you don't like it, just leave. And then, as we're seeing, they're either going on strike or they're fucking leaving. Because when you tell people, or when you threaten people that you know they're not going to be getting all that shit, and you tell them to leave, well, guess what? People are going to leave, and privatization is not going to help that. It's only going to make things worse, right?
In a safe manner, not the condition they have us working for the past 5-10 years. Enough is enough, Sinai.
And I find it completely ironic how, we gave a shit about our frontline workers when it came to like healthcare during COVID, but after COVID, like either like the late stages of COVID or like whatever the fuck you want to call what we're living in now, we just like don't even give a shit, right? Yeah, we sure gave a shit about our fucking healthcare workers during COVID, but now I'm believing that that's more fucking just virtue signaling than anything.
We have 550 vacancies. That is an anomaly. When I work in the ICU, I'm supposed to only have 2 patients. I have 3 to 4 routinely for the past 5 to 6 years.
I want everyone to know that last year a law was passed in New York State which required safe staffing. What does that mean? It means the imposition of ratios from patients to nurses. And was it enforced? No. Was it enforced? No. Was it enforced? No. Did they have to work overtime? Yes. Did they have to work on a number of patients? Yes. At the peril of patients? Yes. And at the peril of themselves? Yes. And so it's so important that the Department of Health get it right. That's right. And enforce the law. Woo!
And like the funny thing is that nurses do like one of the hardest jobs in all of healthcare, right? And they're being treated like complete shit, which is infuriating. So yeah, let's watch this.
Trucker convoy was only the most visible symptom of a Canadian society becoming increasingly polarized. Now, Eurasia Group, a New York-based consultancy, is warning its clients that the forces that spawn the protests are likely to continue and intensify in Canada in 2023. And who are Eurasia's clients? Well, some of the world's biggest pension funds and other institutional investors who need to manage risk.
It is worth watching because from an investor's perspective, if it's very difficult to tackle big issues like climate change because of a deepening and widening moat between, roughly speaking, progressives and conservatives in it.
Wait, what? No, liberals are not fucking progressive. There's a common saying on the left. You cut a liberal, a fascist bleeds.
In the country, then it's a dicier prospect for investment.
Liberals are. I love these fucking dumbass centrists and conservatives who are like, oh well, the liberals are progressive because they pass like the bare fucking minimum that they're supposed to be doing, right? And like, I think centrists are just fucking. I believe that centrists are just have no fucking backbone in general because they see everything as fucking radical, right? Despite the fact that centrists tend to be roped into a lot of right-wing idiocy, because, oh, well, both sides are fucking extreme. Like, they have no backbone. Just admit that you're fucking conservative. Like, let's be honest.
To global peace and security are almost self-evident. Russia's war in Ukraine, an aggressive China, and a defensive Iran
What?
that may feel backed into
An aggressive China? What the fuck has China been doing that's aggressive? Like, outside of, like, the Taiwan shit. Which, you know, was a little bit understandable considering that they had told the US not to go to Taiwan, and Kamala Harris went to Taiwan.
a corner. Meanwhile, the world's citizens are also grappling with inflation and could be dealing with a possible energy crunch and what Eurasia Group calls global water stress. Eurasia Group's Gerald Butts, the former principal secretary to Prime Minister Trudeau, explains.
We see heavily densely populated areas, not just in the places where we Westerners would normally consign those problems to, in coastal East Africa, for instance, equatorial Asia. But you look at what's happening in the Western United States, and
I wonder why that is. I wonder why a lot of Africa and some parts of Asia are experiencing this kind of shit. I wonder why. As well as, like, when it comes to America, I wonder why they're facing huge fucking problems. I wonder why that is.
indeed in Western Canada, we've had a mega drought of historically unprecedented proportions.
Canada is vulnerable to all of those risks, but Eurasia Group is also sounding the alarm about declining trust in traditional media combined with the country's exposure to a hyper-partisan U.S. media environment.
Well, yeah, first of all, like, mainstream, like, I'm very transparent about this in general. I let you guys know on, like, my biases and everything, right? When it comes down to mainstream media, they're generally owned by massive corporations, and their primary objective is getting clicks and spreading and pushing propaganda, right? When it comes down to like more independent stuff, yeah, there is going to be some propaganda there as well, of course. But generally speaking, this is why a lot of people tend to turn towards other sources of media or of news stuff, right? Whether it comes from, like, people like fucking idiots like Ben Shapiro or Tim Pool or whoever the fuck else, or like on the right wing or on the left wing, you have people like Hassan or Vosh or whoever, right? Like, you know, people are going to like people don't trust the mainstream media anymore because they're seeing right through their bullshit.
I think the biggest
unless you live in America and you're like fucking over the age of, like, I don't know, like 30, and you watch like a fuck ton of like Fox News.
Problem that it generates, though, is that there's no agreed upon set of facts.
Now, all of these factors underline the importance and value of the country's political leaders, federal and provincial, right or left, to reach cross-partisan solutions to manage the risks in what is likely to be a turbulent 2023. Farah.
I mean, bipartisanship will absolutely do fucking nothing for this. What we need to be doing is we need to be completely taking out the fucking money aspect of the media, right? And you know, like, I'm all for freedom of the press. I believe that they should 100% have freedom when it comes to coverage, right? As well as, like, transparency for our political leaders, right? Like, there's a fuck ton that needs to be done, and it's not going to be done by partisanship. Like, we've already seen, like, what the conservative hogs want, right? They don't want to be transparent about anything. They don't really stand for anything either, other than Justin Trudeau bad, and Justin Trudeau made inflation. which is ridiculous. Like, that's pretty much all that they fucking stand for, as well as like crying about being oppressed despite the fact that they're fucking not.
David Aiken.
Hi there, I'm Rosemary Barton. Here's what's at issue this week. As the U.S. grapples with the consequences of a fractured Republican Party, the former conservative leader in this country is calling for less polarization on the right and the left. In a blog post, Aaron O'Toole expressed concern about anti-Trudeau flags and sentiments, calling Trudeau his opponent but not his enemy. He also says hyper-aggressive rhetoric is normalizing rage and damaging democracy. The current conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, was asked about the comments.
I have never seen so much hurt and so much pain and suffering in our population in my nearly 2 decades in politics. So yes, of course, we should tell people to be more civil.
What?
And to reject offensive signs, flags, and language. But we should also...
So then we should reject you, though, right? Because you literally had tags of on like your fucking YouTube videos for like misogynistic shit, right? So if that's the case, we should 100% be rejecting you, you fucking clown.
So ask ourselves, why are people hurting so badly?
So what's to be made of O'Toole's warnings about polarization, and is it, as he suggests, the duty of elected officials to bridge that divide? Let's bring in our panelists. Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, Althea Raj, and Kelly Kreiderman joins us this week from Alberta. Good to see everyone. There's lots of interesting things here in the post, but also the person who posted it. But let's start about the content, if we can. Chantal, what did you make of Aaron O'Toole's warnings there and what he had to say?
I guess it was a welcome contribution, maybe coming late in the game because I did follow, it's my job, Aaron O'Toole's social media feed, which he probably wasn't handling when he was leader. Yeah. And it was all about how Justin Trudeau was responsible for everything that was wrong on the planet. Now, if that's your message, you shouldn't be too surprised about flags that go way over the line. I think the part of his message to the Conservatives, because he did admit that it was mostly Conservatives who were indulging in this kind of hate approach to politics. I think the message to current Conservatives is that if you cater to people who are in that register, you're probably going to turn off people who used to vote Liberal and might consider you as an option and will not on that basis.
It was interesting too, Andrew, that it came from Mr. O'Toole, given that a lot of the election where he ultimately ended up losing and then lost his job seemed to be very polarizing, whether it be about vaccine mandates or guns or other things.
Yeah, I mean, I thought he struck a very statesman-like tone in this message that frankly was absent from the remarks of his successor. I will say, I think polarization isn't quite the right word. I think I've made this point before, but I'll make it again, which is that, you know, we don't have a 50-50 split like you have in the States with a great, huge no man's land in between that nobody dares cross. And polarization itself isn't necessarily a bad thing. We were polarized over free trade, but that's because there was a big decision we had to make as a country. The problem is extremism. And there's some of it on the left, but these days it's more of a problem on the right. And it manifests itself in this kind of hate-filled messaging. That's not a function of the state of the economy or what have you. I mean, I'm a little older than Pierre Poilievre, but I can remember when there was a lot more hurt and suffering, when we had double-digit inflation and double-digit unemployment and double-digit interest rates all at the same time. But even if you have a lot of suffering, it doesn't excuse, as he seemed to be tiptoeing up.
The biggest thing when it comes down to it is the Conservatives in general are trying to push for more extremism within their own ranks, as well as appeal to the small minority just in general, right? Like, they're going off of like the fringe of their party, and that's pushing away the more moderate conservatives away, right? Like, it's silly.
To this kind of behavior. The people who are putting out this kind of hateful message aren't complaining because they think the government is incompetent. They think Justin Trudeau is a unique threat to the country, that he's guilty of treason and tyranny and everything else. There's lots to dislike about this government, but there's lots to dislike about most governments. And
True.
the notion that this is something we've never seen and this is the worst thing we've ever had to deal with is just ridiculous.
Althea?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think it was nice to hear Aaron O'Toole read his, it was good to hear and read his thoughts on that. I would have liked to have him reflect on that while he was still, frankly, in a position of power.
He wouldn't, though.
Much like I would have liked Jason Kenney to, it's like they realized after they fed the beast and the beast basically ate their face off that, oh, maybe it was a bad thing that we did that. And it would be nice if politicians realized that putting their personal and partisan interests ahead of the common good by feeding that anger, by fomenting that anger and that polarization, or those extremes as Andrew would like us to describe them, that has really negative consequences. And we see that, down south.
And Kelly, I would imagine that's an easier message, frankly, to give in the position that Mr. O'Toole is in now compared to where he was, like it or not, whether he should have done it before or not.
Yeah, there's a sense of distance there, and you can see that in that statesman-like tone and in, setting it from the top, criticizing his own party members from the top, I think gives him a lot more credibility in delving to the issue. But, he does point out that there is hatred and rhetoric on both sides. He does talk about the people who said, stop Harper when Harper was in power. And I think at that time they felt like Stephen Harper was a unique threat to the political culture of Canada.
I mean,
think a lot
Harper was complete dog shit, though. Like, even if we're going like off of allegation charges or just allegations in general, he had like what, 72 compared to like Trudeau's like 6 or 7.
And sometimes more blunt,
like, it's so silly.
More blunt force.
Chantal.
But I think he speaks from a lot of authority because he criticizes both sides.
Right, Chantal.
But I think it's different, and I'm like Andrew. I'm a bit older than Pierre Poilievre, and I've seen people who were more unhappy about the state of things. I've also covered a series of prime ministers who ended up being hated, not always for the right reasons, by a section of the electorate. What's different this time is what you're seeing in Washington now. It is a threat to the capacity of the conservative movement to put together a coalition that is large enough to take government.
Like I said, it's completely due to the right-wing movement growing in steam, as well as the polarization that is happening just across the planet in general.
And watching what's happening in Washington,
because they see that late-stage capitalism is failing them,
I think that
and they're not going to be doing anything about it,
the thinking of many conservatives
and moving to a better system.
And so, Andrew, is that a message
because they're still making money
sending to the party, to Mr. Poilievre? And if it is, in terms of how Pierre Poilievre responded, what should we take from that?
Well, I thought it was very much directed at the Conservative Party, and with good reason. And the point I think that he made, and I would make as well, is this has nothing to do with ideology. It has to do with
despite the fact that he was literally saying the Nazi parts out loud when he was running, like, that was pretty wild.
There's been a robust ideological difference between them and the Liberals that made it worth considering them as an alternative to government. But you can do so in a way where you're attempting to persuade people rather than just shout them down or beat them over the head, where you yourself have been persuaded by facts and reason, not just ideological dogma, where you have an awareness of what's possible and what means are appropriate to achieving your political ends, and you rule out certain other means, where you don't consort with extremists and I shouldn't say radicals, but hooligans, basically, as we saw in the streets of Ottawa. And all these things seem to have certainly gone by the boards in the United States. The people who are gumming up the works now in Washington don't have any coherent agenda of any kind. It's just rage and self-importance and everything else. And you've seen some of that in the same sphere in Canada, where people are losing contact with reality, losing contact with what's possible, and where political leaders, rather than trying to bring people back into the mainstream and trying to bridge these kinds of divides, are simply exacerbating it.
Althea?
Yes, I agree with Andrew in the sense that it was very statesmanlike and it's a reflection, a message to conservatives. But I also think it's part of Aaron O'Toole's rehabilitation. I don't expect that Aaron O'Toole will be running again for a seat in the House of Commons, and I think he is
rehabilitation whilst he's in the Conservative Party. Yeah, that's totally sounds like he's becoming rehabilitated to me.
The one thing that I think is important, and I don't remember who mentioned it, but I think what has changed from the Stop Harper signs to the F Trudeau signs is the behavior around your political opponents being your enemy, being traitors to the country, that dehumanizing language, the kind of language that we saw from Elliot McDavid, that the man in Grand Prairie, Alberta, who verbally accosted Chrystia Freeland in August, which I think for a lot of people was the first time that they saw kind of that anger directed at somebody being called a traitor, being told that you were destroying the country, that your children were not going to have a future because of Ms. Freeland's actions. That is different. And when your enemy becomes a traitor, and when you believe things like the Prime Minister is purposefully...
I do also think that when it comes down to it, there is also like a completely different like ideological divide as well. Like right-wingers are like completely like psychotic by thinking like, oh, it's like the fucking immigrants' fault or whatever the fuck, and you know their general view is like, oh, we want to fucking kill everyone that's not like us, comparative to like and like genuinely make the lives worse for everyone, right? Outside of like their little in-group. But in comparison to like the left wing, which is like, yeah, let's, you know, make things better for everyone, like all get along and shit, like there's a completely different divide, right?
Starving, you know, millions of Canadians through fertilizer limitations. That has an enormous consequence because we're no longer talking about facts, and it makes it really hard to govern for the majority of the country.
30 seconds, Kelly.
I think, you know, a lot of political movements are motivated by anger, and I think part of a politician's job is to funnel that anger in a productive way, maybe in a way that speaks to our better angels. And I think what Pierre Poilievre has done is spoken to what makes people angry. Certainly, whether you're talking about housing costs or inflation, what he hasn't done
but he has
really
no fucking plan for it, though.
And governance options.
It's so funny. Like what?
The federal government is preparing to unveil its legislation to transition workers from the oil and gas sector to green energy jobs. Natural Resources Minister Jonathan...
And the funny thing is remember how Danielle Smith said she would not use the Sovereignty Act? She actually did use it for this because she cares about big oil more than keeping workers in work whilst, you know, there's a transition towards green energy. Keep that in mind.
Says the plan will likely create more opportunities.
This is about creating a future that will create good, well-paid jobs and economic prosperity in every region of this country.
But some oil-producing provinces are concerned about the effect the legislation will have on thousands of workers and the industry. So is the Just Transition Bill the death knell for oil and gas, as some provinces are saying, or will it help bring about the shift to green energy, as the Liberals are hoping? Let's bring back our panelists, Chantal, Andrew, Althea, and Kelly. Kelly, you're in Alberta. I'll start with you, because it's certainly the Alberta government that's had the most fierce reaction to this so far. Is it based in reality, or do they need to get involved in this plan to try and influence it in some positive way?
Well, I think, you know, the first thing you always got to lay out is that the UCP government here is in the throes of a very competitive election with the NDP, and that colors everything they do. Where they can win is sticking up for Alberta's economic interests, and you will hear that from now until the May election nonstop. That being said, I was surprised to see the UCP go so hard on this legislation that we have been calling just transition, but I know Wilkinson and Seamus O'Regan do not like that terminology. They're going to call it, I think, sustainable jobs, because they know just transition is not great terminology. It's not great communications. It sounds too definitive and bold. And I
It
think
also
this
doesn't
is
really
what the
matter
federal
though,
government will say
because
is
like
this is a
the
jobs
the
incentive act.
UCP
It's
is still going to
nothing
cry about
nefarious.
it
It's
either
not
way
meant to wipe
and
out the
use the
industry, but I
Sovereignty
think
Act
it
against
goes
it.
on top of
Even if it
what
is going to
happening
like
on a
legitimately
whole
create
host
more
of other
jobs.
energy and climate related legislation, like a cap on oil and gas emissions, which is also coming this year, like Bill C-69, which the Alberta government is still concerned about. No one in central Canada is really concerned about. So I think it is a cumulative effect of concern from the Alberta government. On this one particular act, I am surprised because I think when we're talking about carrots and sticks in terms of energy and climate policy, it sounds like this is going to be a carrot policy. That is something that Alberta and the oil and gas industry...
I mean, honestly, I think we should be whacking the UCP with the stick as well. Because that's usually how the carrot and stick model works, you know. You give them something that they want, and that they don't follow, or if they don't follow through with it, you whack them with the stick. Like, we should be doing that. But the fucking liberals have no backbone, and the UCP are just gonna fucking cry until they get their way either way, so it doesn't matter.
Would like to see, and they certainly would like to see all kinds of energy jobs, oil and gas and renewables.
Andrew?
It's because they're being lobbied by the oil industry, that's why.
You always want to have transition programs for workers that are displaced from any industry for any reason. That's just part of a modern economy, is helping people make those shifts. I'm not sure why you necessarily need a special one for this. You can say, well, the government has caused their job loss because of their carbon pricing policies, but the government policies are always causing people to lose their jobs for one reason or another. Free trade caused a lot of job losses, also created a lot of jobs. And as part of that transition, people are going to go, so far as they're displaced from the oil and gas industry, are going to go to all kinds of different jobs in all kinds of different industries. There's no particular reason.
Not only that, they will also like move to different provinces for better job opportunities. We saw the exact same thing happen in America, right?
Why they should be transitioning to renewable energy. That make a certain politician's logic, but it doesn't actually fit with the real world. The real world, people are going to wind up in all kinds of different industries, and I don't think you want to prejudge that. So unless, of course, what you really want to do is subsidize renewables and subsidize green energy, which is what they want to do, and this gives you another handy hook to hang it on. Oh, well, it's because we're helping workers. You can help workers without subsidizing particular industries.
Chantal?
I mean, but subsidization does help, though.
Subsidizing comes from the thinking that you have to compete with Joe Biden's policies on the same issue.
Like not just subsidizing, but nationalizing that stuff too, right? That would also help.
To a zero gas emission economy. So that's one. I agree with Kelly about the just transition. I'm old enough to think it reminds one too much of the Just Society of someone else who was called Trudeau. And I think maybe one should be wary of the word just in this context. But I agree with Andrew. This is, at best, only a small part in a puzzle that is governed by reality and not by governments. The federal government is not setting out to change Canada's economy. It's going to have to change. That is a competitive reality increasingly, especially when you look at what has been happening in the United States with the policies that are being put in place.
Last word to you, Althea.
Well, the truth is we don't actually know much about this bill. Cabinet has discussed it, but you know, in the words of the Prime Minister's office today, was they're still working on it. So there haven't been a lot of high-level province-to-province talks. There are still negotiations with
I mean,
unions,
I thought
the
we
labor
gave a shit
movement.
about states' rights, though, right? So, like, who gives a shit about that if that's the case, right?
Campaign to basically create a $2 billion fund to help green projects, green energy projects in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Newfoundland, as well as basically create this kind of like grand training center for not just workers who've lost their jobs, but workers who might wish to transition to new clean tech energy jobs to get the skills that they need. It's basically, I think it was Kelly who said it, it's a carrots bill. But we haven't seen it yet, and it feels like a lot of it is just like a plan to have a plan. Yeah. I think what's more interesting is the politics of the bill, and Kelly is absolutely right that this is going to be weaponized in the lead up to the Alberta election in the spring.
Of course.
And I think the risk for the UCP is when they go too far, when they start talking about how Ottawa wants to phase out all, Alberta jobs, is that the party starts looking like a dinosaur, and you will have the federal Liberals all
they
too pleased to say,
genuinely believe that,
we
though.
can't afford not to do a bill like this, that looking down south at what Joe Biden has done with the IRA, we need to do something like this.
Thank you all. Thank you all very much for this.
I mean, they do. The UCP genuinely does believe that.
A tragic story out of Nova Scotia.
So let's move on to the Nova Scotian woman who died in the ER.
Where a woman died waiting for medical care at an emergency room. Gunter Holthoff of Tidnish said his wife Allison began feeling severe stomach pain on the morning of December 31st. They drove to the nearest emergency department in Amherst around 11 a.m. Holthoff said it was after 6 p.m. before they saw a doctor and Allison received any treatment.
And I told them, like, she's getting worse, like, she's in pain. And she said, oh yeah, we'll do what we can. It was all so much information, I don't even 100% know what I said or what she said, but something along the lines, like, I told her she was getting worse. I did, from there on, I did tell the triage nurse and the lady behind the desk, at least a couple times, that it was getting worse. She wasn't doing good. She was in pain, and
like, all that this proves is how fucking dog shit these conservative premiers are, right? Is pretty much, like I said, time and time again, the entire, like, almost the entire fucking province is, or provinces are being run by conservative premiers. And we've seen time and time again that they don't give a shit. And even when stories like this do come out, they decide to cut funding even more, which is super fucking infuriating. Like, no one has to die in the ER waiting to see a doctor or whoever the fuck. Like, this is completely ridiculous. Spend the fucking money that you get for healthcare on fucking healthcare instead of trying to privatize it. You fucking. I'm not gonna say more than that. I'm gonna have a heated gaming moment or gamer moment if I do.
there was not much of a response. It's, we're doing what we can. We don't have any beds. She really didn't look good. Really didn't look good. I see my grandfather when I was little in a vacant coma, and honestly, he looked better at the time than she did now.
The CBC's Sarah Galaction is following the story. So, Sarah, what more do we know about the circumstances?
There's some heartbreaking detail coming from that press conference given by Gunter Holthoff, Andrew, about his wife Allison's condition the morning of December 31st. She had experienced stomach pain earlier in September, and since then there had been a certain amount of pain that she'd been dealing with. But December 31st, things were different. And so he says they got to the hospital in record time. You heard him say there was around 11 a.m. His account of this timeline, he says that he thinks that they were out of triage quite quickly by about 11:15 a.m. He talks about the kind of signals she was giving about the pain that she was in. He had to carry her into the Cumberland Regional Health Center. Then she was put in a wheelchair. And after triage at around 11:15, there they sat, he says, in the waiting room. She was most of the time slumped over in a wheelchair. At one point, lying down on the floor in a fetal position to try and deal with the pain. And they were there throughout.
This is so infuriating,
until,
man.
Around 3 p.m., he says, when they were finally moved into a room that he
And the thing is that, like, it happens too fucking much. Like, this is only one story out of, like, probably like thousands at this point. Like, it's so infuriating. Like, why the fuck can't these dumbass premiers do their fucking job and, you know, actually listen to the fucking healthcare workers?
She turned to her husband Gunter and said, "This is not from smoking marijuana." At one point, around 6 p.m.
And, like, who gives a shit if she was smoking, like, cannabis? Like, honestly, who cares, right? It's just a way to villainize the victim here, out of the negligence of the fucking premiers and those responsible for the healthcare system.
Or just before she
it's just shifting blame.
That prompting a doctor to prescribe an IV for that pain. Things happening quickly after that. He says about 6:30 p.m. she was moved into an X-ray room, and he recalls it about 15 minutes after that he heard the call of code blue. He says that
That's not
there
good.
were attempts to she was resuscitated 3 different occasions, but that she lost too much blood, and by 9 p.m. they had to have a tough conversation about the amount of blood that she had lost and her chances of surviving a surgery and what the outcome actually would look like if she did even survive that surgery, of which there was little chance that she would. And Andrew, that's when he had to make the difficult call to let Allison go.
Is he getting any answers, and what are authorities saying?
Well, he is not. He says he's not getting answers from the autopsy, not a complete picture as to what exactly caused her death, and that's what he wants to know. In addition, whether or not delay in treatment or a misdiagnosis during triage may have contributed to this. The health authority not commenting due to privacy concerns. The Premier of Nova Scotia was asked to weigh in on this, and I want to play you his response.
Total sadness, I think, is what we all feel over that. So, you know, we'll try to understand what happened there. There will be an investigation. There's a lot of questions, and I think we'll go through the investigation, try to understand, you know, some of these questions, get some answers, and certainly have those discussions with the family would be my expectation, hope, yeah.
We also heard from the health minister, who is talking about the sort of added level of complication to what the staff at this Cumberland Regional Health Center are dealing with. Not only are they dealing with what we see across the country in terms of the short staffing and stressed out workers within hospitals.
I wonder why that is.
Back in May of 2022, which caused them to have to relocate from the emergency room. And what we heard from Gunther's MLA is that those renovations to the emergency room were supposed to take 8 weeks, and there have been significant delays, and they're still not completed. So that's just an added layer, Andrew, to what is going on here.
All right, Sarah, thank you.
Yeah.
Put her on my back and got her situated there. We walked through the...
I don't know if I have time for that. I don't know if I have time for this interview. For the Holoff family, a trip to the emergency room at the Cumberland Regional Health Care Center in New York on New Year's Eve turned into a nightmare. Gunter Holtoff and of Tinnish, Nova Scotia, said his wife Allison began feeling sick the morning of December 31st, but thought she had just had an upset stomach. When it worsened throughout the morning, Holthoff drove his wife to the nearest emergency department in Amherst, Nova Scotia, around 11 a.m. Holthoff said he carried Allison into the hospital on his back. She was obviously in pain, he told CBC News in an interview Sunday. I was rolling her in the wheelchair, and she said she could hardly sit up. The pair waited more than 6 hours in the emergency department waiting room, and then in a room inside the unit as Allison's pain worsened. Holthoff said it was after 6 p.m. before they saw a doctor and Allison received any treatment. By then, he said, it was too late. After they were tried, Holthoff recalled, the nurses asked for urine samples when he took Allison to the bathroom. He could not support her alone, and she fell on the floor. I could not get her up myself, so I went outside the door to ask for help, Holthoff said. Two security guards had to assist her. Then Holthoff took Allison back into the waiting room. He said she was no longer able to sit in the wheelchair the hospital had provided because of the pain she was in, so she ended up lying on the floor. He told the nurses and the lady at the desk there are a couple times it is getting worse and nothing happened, he said. So the security guards in time, they brought a couple blankets out and they brought us a cup of water, and I used to put some ice on her lips. As more time passed, Allison told her husband she felt like she was dying. He approached the nurses a few more times around 3 p.m. The couple were taken into a room with a bed, but no medical equipment. Holoff said he had to help Allison use the bedpan and use paper towel to roll on the wall to clean it up. At some point there, she was getting worse, and she started to scream in pain. He said. A nurse came in and checked Allison's blood pressure again and saw it was alarmingly low. Holoff said that's when things started to change and the care became more urgent. When they finally saw a doctor, they still hadn't received any test results. Then, as a nurse prepped Allison for an x-ray, Holoff said he watched her condition worsen. She was in so much pain she couldn't breathe. He tried to comfort her and assure her the doctors would determine what was causing her pain. The next thing is her eyes rolled to the back of her head, her chest started rising. Something started beeping, he said. The next thing you hear is over the PA, code blue in X-ray. Holoff said the room was flooded with people. While he was sent to the hallway, a doctor later told him they resituated Allison 3 times to no avail. Even if she would have survived at that point, she had too long a time without significant blood flow to the brain and vital organs. It would have been not a life worth living, he said. Since that day, Holoff said he feels left in the dark as a result to Allison's autopsy hasn't been released, and he hadn't heard from anyone in the government except for local MLAs for at least a week after her death. Holoff said the healthcare system failed his wife, and he doesn't want her death to be in vain. We need to change the system. The system is obviously broken, or if it's not broken yet, it's not too far off. Holoff said, something needs to improve. I don't want anyone else to go through this. I want a spot where if my kids break their legs, or we can take them to the hospital if anything happens. Allison Holoff, 37, was a mother of 3 school-age children. She was also the deputy chief and treasurer of the Tendish Bridge Fire Department. Her obituary said she won a Volunteer of the Year award for her work organizing community events like pancake breakfast and the annual children's Christmas party. She was the most amazing person I've ever known, Holoff said. She was great, and somebody could get a helping hand out of her. If they needed help with anything, she was there for you. A celebration of life was held at a local community center on Friday, and Holoff said the turnout was overwhelming. I did not even know she impacted so many people, he said. I never seen that center so packed. I haven't seen so many people there in 10 plus years that I've been here. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we can also do that one too. The question on Holof's mind now is whether his wife would still be alive if she had received treatment quickly on New Year's Eve. Holof said he doesn't blame the staff at the hospital for what happened, but he blames the system. He wants Allison's first time dealing with an unreasonably long wait time for the emergency medical care, he said. In September, Holof called an ambulance after she fell off her horse. They waited more than 3 hours in the field until it was cold and dark. Members of the local fire department then took her to the hospital in a rescue truck. There are horror stories all the time about people waiting for an ambulance. It's horrendous. Like, there's no ambulances here if you need them. And if you're and if you do get to the hospital, if you're lucky, if you get to see it, you get seen, Holof said. Allison did recover from her fall, he said, but she still had some residual hip and back pain. After his wife's death, Holof approached his local MP, Elizabeth Smith McCrossan, for help. On January 6th, Smith McCrossan wrote an open letter to the provincial health minister, Michelle Thompson, asking for an urgent investigation into the situation. The letter said a request to meet earlier in the week had been denied. The government doesn't seem to pay any attention, Holof said. I don't know what needs to happen or how many people need to die. It's just a shame. CBC News asked Nova Scotia Health how many deaths occurred in the emergency departments in 2022, but the department declined to say. Very sus. Smith McCrossan, who sits as an independent, said she is still pushing to meet with the health minister. That is why we're requesting an investigation, so that family have the answers, she wrote. They've heard nothing from anyone in the government, and the challenge is because they're not hearing anything. It's getting more and more upsetting. I'm hearing from hundreds of people in the community asking, why is nothing being said? Why is nothing being done? On Monday, Thompson announced that an investigation, as known as the Quality Review, had started automatically after Allison's death. She said it will determine what happened and what can be done to prevent similar situations from happening again. Family members will be invited to and included in the investigation because it's very important, if they want to participate, that they have an opportunity to tell the events as they experience them, Thompson said in an interview. Results of the investigation will be shared with the family, she said. Premier Tim Hudson offered his condolences to the family on Monday, calling it a tragic loss that resolves our focus to fix healthcare. Yeah, sure, I believe that. Certainly, anything we can do to improve healthcare, support Nova Scotians, and support those working in the healthcare system will do quickly, he said. The same day, an emailed statement from the province said Nova Scotia Health has been in contact with the family since Sunday after several attempts to contact the family since last week. Smith McCrossan said healthcare workers have also been contacting her about the working conditions at the hospital. I hear from people on a regular basis upset about long wait times and concerns about the conditions in the ER, she said. Our ER flooded in May, so there's been no temporary ER setups in ambulance care or ambulatory care, which is very challenging for our healthcare workers to work in. Last week, following the cabinet meeting, Thompson told reporters that the flood prompted Nova Scotia Health to relocate the emergency room real quickly and unexpectedly. She acknowledged that the temporary emergency room was set up was causing challenges. We know that those conditions are not ideal, Thompson said. They're in a bit of a tough spot right now, and we're working with them, knowing that we will make improvements in the future. She said a redevelopment plan is in the design phase, and she could not share the timeline for that project just yet. For his part, Holoff said he has a clear message to the government. The healthcare system in Cumberland County and probably the whole province needs major improvements in any way. Which, yeah, it does. Ghost guns are starting to pop up in Canada, which is unsurprising. It was only a matter of time. Police in Canada seized more than 100 3D printed guns last year, with some jurisdictions seeing big increases in these types of weapons, and even busting manufacturing rings for the first time. Calgary, for example, police seized 17 3D printed guns in 2022 compared to just one each in 2021 and 2020. It wasn't a big proponent of putting a lot of resources into 3D printed guns here in Calgary when we first started the unit, because we just didn't see them, said Ben Lozin, acting staff sergeant of Calgary Police Service Firearms Investigations Unit. All of a sudden now we're seeing an uptick in 2022, so who knows what 2023 will bring. 3D printed guns fall into the category of homemade firearms, referring to as ghost guns, in part because they're untraceable. They have no serial number because the printed parts of the gun is the receiver. That part is the weapon that is regulated in Canada. Other parts of the gun can be purchased at stores and online because they are untraceable or online without a firearms license. Plans for producing these firearms are easily available online, and the item can be made using a custom grade 3D printer. To get a sense of the scope of the problem, CBC News reached out to 20 police forces across the country and collected data from media reports in areas where police wouldn't discuss the number of firearms seized. These guns have been found across the country, from cities from Saskatoon and Winnipeg to smaller places like Stanford, Ontario, and Volcan. And Volcan. When I was looking for statistics, it looks like there's a flood in 3D guns entering the city to make up for the gun shortage we have in the city right now, said Inspector Elton Hall of the Winnipeg Police Service as at a news conference in July after his force seized 3 3D printed guns, 3 3D printed receivers. I knew this was going to happen, he said, of these guns making their way to Winnipeg. Despite efforts he detailed in the news conference to combat gun violence in the city, it was only a matter of time. In December, Winnipeg police announced that they had made arrests after a criminal network solicited and paid legitimate 3D printer services to manufacture firearm receivers. The Royal Newfoundland Countbury announced the burst of a manufacturer in February. 8 3D printed firearm frames were seized, along with multiple printers and other items, including silencers, which police said were also 3D printed. In Saskatoon, police seized 2 3D printed 3D printers and a number of gun parts. In January, a first for police there. In all, 7 forces told CBC News that they saw an increase in the number of 3D printed guns from previous years, but the data provided to CBC was incomplete. Other of those 7 forces, only 5 had specific numbers, which totaled 46 46 3D printed guns seized in 2022, compared to only 4 the previous year. Just so wild, man, right? Anyone can go online, they can purchase a computer, a laptop, they can buy a 3D printer for $300, and now they're printing firearms, said Acting Staff Sergeant Lawrenson with the Calgary Police. He said that across the country, an untraceable gun can sell for between $2,500 to $7,500, depending on the city. The Ontario Provincial Police seized 18 such weapons in 2022 after having found only 1 before. The Toronto Area Police Forces, CBC News reached out to, had seen a few 3D printed guns. Peel Region, for example, seized only 1 last year that hadn't tracked numbers before that. York Regional Police have seized a single 3D printed firearm, fully functioning firearm, and was used in a carjacking robbery, according to a statement with the police organization. In Toronto, 8 3D printed guns have been seized across 2020, but in a statement to the CBC, Toronto Police Services said cross-border importation and trafficking of firearms produced by regulated gun manufacturers remain the prototypic public safety threat in Toronto at this time. Even so, there are concerns in Canada's biggest cities about the untraceability of ghost guns. While we haven't seen a rise in 3D printed guns, in particular in Toronto, TPS is increasingly seizing guns that are privately manufactured without serial numbers. The statement said, these can include 3D printed firearms, Covenant pellet-style guns, and homemade firearms. In 2013, 3D printed guns first made headlines in the U.S. after firearm in question was called the Liberator, and it was a single-shot pistol. Its creator wanted to put the plans for the firearm online so others can make it as well. It was the start of a legal battle stateside that ended in 2018 when a lawsuit filed for Cody Wilson, the creator of the Liberator, was settled. The move made it legal to post firearm plans online. That's just wild to me, right? In most U.S. states, residents are allowed to make guns for personal use. In Wisconsin, for example, gun designer Ethan Middleton has put plans for firearms online, sharing them with a large community of 3D printed gun enthusiasts. Middleton says for him, it's about the right to enshrine the U.S. Constitution, First Amendment, freedom of speech, and the Second Amendment, right to bear arms, which is very funny that he would say that. We see as freedom of speech isn't. We see this as freedom of speech. It isn't it's an art form, Middleton said. I think these types of things, being out in the public, help responsible adults and responsibly armed people to stay responsibly armed, whether the government thinks they should be or not. Middleton's gun designs are named after foods like apple pie, mac and cheese, and have been downloaded thousands of times. He says the number of Canadians have contacted him about these designs. There's a couple of dudes who messaged somewhat frequently, basically just looking for files, saying, "Hey, I really appreciate you for doing this." In an interview with CBC News, Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino said, "My biggest concern around ghost guns is that it is fast, it is cheap, it's accessible, and its purpose is to evade the law. And so it's very obvious why it is that organized crime uses this technology." Last year, Mendicino called these firearms a major concern for Canadians and U.S. law enforcement. But C-21, Canada's recently introduced firearms legislation, does not target them specifically. Which is so weird, right? Like, you think that they should. The Standing Committee on Public Safety is examining Bill C-21, which makes amendments to Canada's Firearms Act. Mendicino said the committee is examining a way in which we can make it illegal under the law with further practicality in the definition of parts of firearms, which would include barrels and slides. He said the government wants to send a very powerful signal to the organized criminal community that if they're in business of trying to evade accountability through the law, that we're going to make it harder for you through the deterrence and bring you to justice. All right, let's watch Daniel Smith using or complaining about stuff again.
Welcome back to Power Play. We're going to head over to Alberta, where the government there has just announced inflation relief for seniors, vulnerable Albertans, and families with kids with an income under $180,000. Premier Danielle Smith is in Calgary. Hi, Premier. Good to see you.
My pleasure. Good to see you. Congratulations on the new show.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Premier, I want to start off with
She's so loud, bro.
Today. The money that you announced for Albertans. How do Canadians listening square your government's ability to disperse that amount of money with asking the federal government to write a bigger and strings-free check for healthcare?
Look, there's a couple of things I'd say. Number one is the reason why we have the ability to give money back to Albertans is the same reason why we're enjoying a surplus this year. That when oil and natural gas prices
It's because you've been cutting.
And we have a bit of a culture.
It's because you've been cutting shit. That's why. You've been cutting funding to shit. That's why you have a surplus.
In Alberta, that when we benefit as the owners of the resource, we want them to share in it, especially those who are most in need. When it comes to healthcare, I'm of the view that it's my job to try to solve the healthcare crisis that we have. It's a crisis that's
then why not spend that surplus of money that you've been cutting from the healthcare system on it then?
But I'm not going to stop in working on health reform. I know that my job is to fix healthcare first, and some of that is structural change. Some of it might be alleviated with some money, but I'm not going to wait for the federal government to make a decision before I act.
So to be clear, are you in concert with other premiers
What?
who have clearly asked the federal government to increase its share through the Canada Health transfer of healthcare funding?
I've been supportive of that move. It started, I think, 3 years ago, and so I'm supportive and adding my voice to that. But I think that we've also seen that the federal government, on two occasions just in the last month, have said that they're not going to do it. And I'm not going to stop doing healthcare reform because the federal government doesn't want to partner with us.
They're doing healthcare reform by cutting your healthcare, Albertans. Keep that in mind.
I want to circle back to your announcement today in a second, but I also want to be clear on the ask from the federal government. The federal government has said, okay, at some point we are willing to increase the amount of money transferred to provinces, but we want some accountability attached to it, so-called strings attached to it. Are you okay with that?
I'm working on accountability measures right now. I want more accountability from the healthcare system. It's why I'm asking for measures on wait times in hospitals. I'm asking for measures on how long it takes once you get into an emergency room. How long does it take before you get treated and released or admitted? I'm asking for measures on...
What about, them not receiving adequate funding to maintain the current services we already have? What about that?
What our surgical wait time is, and I'm also trying to find out how many of our citizens have access to a family doctor. So I'm asking for those measures. When I get them, I will make them public. And if that's the kind of measure that would help the federal government move towards assisting us in addressing some of those pressure points, I'm happy to do that. But my preference would be that they give envelope funding, that they trust that we know better how to manage our healthcare system.
But you don't, though. That's why they want strings attached to the healthcare funding that you're going to be receiving.
And that they are willing to be a funding partner in that based on some of the original agreements.
They said that the federal government did say that they would give you money provided you actually spent it on healthcare and could prove that you spent it on healthcare.
So just to be clear, because I'm not clear from it, I take your point on wanting accountability on all those provincial sort of markers. And you said on the one hand, you are willing, if that's what the federal government is looking for, to submit that data. Is that my understanding? But on the other hand, your preference is they just hand over an envelope of money. So which is it?
Envelope funding would be my preference, absolutely. But I think Albertans need to have measures so that they know their healthcare system is working. So I'm working on that, regardless of what it is that the federal government is asking us to do.
So let me just repeat then. If the federal government comes to you and says, we are willing to increase the amount of money we give Alberta for healthcare, but we would like these markers to be met, or we'd like you to submit data on these 3 fronts, would you say yes?
No, she would not. She would not.
I don't believe that I have to sit and wait for the federal government to make up its mind. As you know, since I got elected,
Wait, what?
I believe that my job is to do what's right for Albertans and for us to be exercised.
But why? They literally said they would provide funding for you if you either met your markers or if you would submit data. Like, what? Bro, she is so dumb.
Our full area of authority. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm quite happy to join in the voices of the premiers in a project that they started 3 years ago and saying, let's meet 50-50. But me improving the healthcare system out in Alberta is going to be done regardless of whether or not it's a priority for us to make sure that the healthcare system works. It's struggling. And I started reforms already as my first action when I became premier, and I'm going to continue it.
Can people watching read from that you don't think that federal funding will come through?
I think they've been pretty clear that they are not coming to the table.
They literally did say that, we will provide you with more funding. However, we want you to actually spend this on healthcare, and we want proof that you're doing it. Like, come on, bro.
I think Duclos has said he's not coming to the table, and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has said he's not coming to the table as well. And so I can't stop the healthcare reforms that I need to do on the basis of hoping the federal government is going to be our funding partner. I've got to make the reforms.
You have a $12 billion surplus. You've been able to use that to announce the money that the relief that you announced today. There's also fuel tax relief, electricity rebates, and natural gas rebates. Is it fair to say that you don't need money from another source?
True.
It's certainly at this time we are blessed with having an immense amount of revenue that has come in from oil and natural gas on the basis of historic production. We've also got to change the royalties that our oil sands producers are paying. But let's remember, we're coming off 8 years of economic hardship. We had 180,000 jobs lost. We had 6 consecutive quarters of people.
I mean, we do have a fairly low unemployment rate, all things considered, but we're still facing economic downturn because of the capitalist system. It has nothing to do with like the small minority of people who don't have a job.
Leaving this province. And so we have now finally seen a turnaround. And I'm grateful for that because it means that our oil sands companies have announced that they're going to invest in additional projects. We're looking at carbon tech and carbon capture as a way of making sure that we've got the greenest barrels in the world. And I think that's all very positive, and I want to support it. But I don't want to take for granted that this is going to always be the case. We were very fortunate in the last year, but this is certainly not something that I would anticipate would continue. I have always felt like Ottawa overtaxes. They take more money than they need, and then they try to dribble it back to the provinces on the basis of conditions.
Wait, what? Does she not know how taxes work? You know you have provincial taxes too, right? And like the federal taxes that we pay do go towards things like healthcare or fucking bailing out corporations, like fucking Loblaws and shit like that. But you know, it generally tends to go to like, I don't know, fucking infrastructure, healthcare, you know, shit like that.
More open.
She's so dumb, bro.
Do what they did before on healthcare, which is to transfer more tax points to us so that we have the ability to generate our own source revenue to be able to pay for the rising pressures in healthcare. I'm not all that keen on Ottawa continuing to dictate to us their priorities when I know pretty clearly what the priorities of Albertans are. So
I mean, but they are allowed to do that, though. If they want you to meet like a certain metric, they 100% have the right to do that.
Certainly better than he does on healthcare.
So just to be clear, to understand that, you would rather raise your own taxes and then use the money for what you want to use it rather than wait for the federal government to hand over more cash?
Yes.
Well, this is what the federal government has said as to why they're not meeting the Premier's request, is that they said that because they did a major transfer of tax points years ago, that they're already funding to 35%. Fair enough. If the funding arrangement was 50-50, I think they should transfer more tax points to us so that we can continue to have the revenues that we need. Because as we go along, we have an aging population. We've got far more expensive biologics and other new developments in healthcare that we're going to need to pay for. And we should be able to have our own source revenue to be able to pay for that. So I prefer the model that they did before, which is recognizing that the pressures that we have at the provincial level means that we should be able to generate more revenue locally. And so that would be my preference.
Yeah, let's see how well that goes over with Albertans. Let's just see how well that goes over.
Respectfully, though, doesn't that ability already exist? Couldn't you, for example, introduce a sales tax and generate extra revenue that you could then direct to
Yep. You could
to healthcare?
And she's laughing about it because she knows that it's gonna hurt her fucking image with small business owners.
Remember, Ottawa has overtaxed Albertans to the tune of $600 billion since about the 1960s. And I have a clear mandate from the Alberta people that they want to stop this equalization. It was part of the reason they gave our government a 62% favorable vote on a referendum to eliminate the concept of equalization. So I think that Ottawa should right-size its programs, that they should accept the amount of tax revenue that they need to fund their areas of jurisdiction, and they should vacate the tax room so that we can fund our areas of jurisdiction.
But literally when they do, you fucking whine about it. So I don't know what to say. I'm sorry.
Cooperative federalism is supposed to look like. Instead, they've taken the approach that they overtax, particularly Alberta, but also Ontario, British Columbia, and other have provinces, and then they redistribute the money on the basis of some pretty strict conditions. And so I think that I'm of a...
I mean, but those strict conditions are usually for a fairly good reason, right? If you have a $12 billion surplus in unspent medical funds, yeah, I think I would introduce some strict conditions as well. I'm just saying. I'm sure a vast majority of people would.
And it shouldn't surprise you that I believe that we have a separate constitutional jurisdiction as defined under Section 92 and 92A and other sections. And I believe that the federal government invades our jurisdiction, and I wish they'd stop. And part of the way that they could stop doing that is stop overtaxing us.
Pardon the interruption, but I just have about 30 seconds left. You're referring to equalization, which is a whole other conversation that could be had. You're describing it as taxation. It's redistribution in other conceptions. My question, though, to you was around the mechanisms you have at your disposal. You could, in fact, introduce a sales tax and increase revenues and pay for health care that way, could you not?
You know what?
Yes,
We're not
but she
gonna have
won't.
A sales tax in this province. It's one of the things
There it
that
is.
I've heard pretty loud and clear from our people. They don't want an additional
Yeah,
sales
you've only been hearing it from small business owners. You haven't been hearing it from like the actual people who are suffering under a current recession or anything. So, you know, there's that. I'm sure a vast majority of Albertans would be on board with a sales tax, just saying.
sales tax. They want us to use the resources that we have to get the best results that we can, and that's part of the reason why I'm focused so strongly on the measures that we need to improve the healthcare performance. It's our biggest ticket item, and I'm going to continue with those reforms.
Can't wait till she's elected out, boys.
Premier, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
All right, and with that will probably be it for me for now. I have to get ready for some stuff and everything, so yeah, I'll see everyone tomorrow, roughly around the same time. Till then.